My husband stood in our Arlington foyer, his fingers intertwined with the woman who had been my best friend since middle school. He squared his shoulders, lifted his chin, and declared he was leaving me for her. He braced his stance, waiting for the inevitable hysterical breakdown. He expected me to shatter the expensive ceramic vases lining the hall or collapse onto the hardwood floor in a puddle of tears. Instead, I offered a tight, polite smile, reached for a suitcase I had packed 48 hours earlier, and handed him my set of house keys. "You can have the house," I said. His smug expression faltered, replaced by a flicker of genuine confusion. What neither of them realized was that I had already audited his fraudulent life, and I was handing them a ticking financial time bomb. "My name is Pamela. I am 38 years old and a defense contract auditor. Welcome to Samantha Told Stories." Before I reveal exactly how I dismantled their fake empire, tell me your age and where you are listening from in the comments below. Hit the like button and subscribe if you appreciate a clean, calculated delivery of karma. The heavy rain of a Virginia spring drummed a steady, relentless beat against the glass of our colonial-style windows. The weather matched the sterile, cold atmosphere settling inside the house. Just 3 days prior, Nathan had stood in that exact same spot, folding a designer trench coat over his arm. He adjusted the cuffs of his tailored suit jacket, refusing to meet my gaze. His eyes darted toward the wet driveway outside, while he delivered a poorly constructed lie. He claimed the supply chain in Frankfurt was a disaster, and his logistics firm needed him on the ground in Europe for a month, perhaps longer. He used industry buzzwords to mask his deceit, mentioning freight forwarding delays and customs bottlenecks, hoping to confuse me with corporate jargon. My career involves dissecting the financial architecture of federal projects, searching for numerical inconsistencies and behavioral red flags. I spend my days in secure facilities near the Pentagon, analyzing massive data sets to catch federal contractors hiding illicit funds. I recognize a fabricated narrative before the speaker even finishes their sentence. Nathan stood there with a rigid posture and a rushed, uncharacteristically high pitch to his voice. His overnight bag rested by the door, far too light for a 30-day overseas deployment. He was a logistics broker who could not even properly plan the logistics of his own infidelity. I did not confront him. I simply told him to have a safe trip and watched his car disappear down the wet street, taking mental notes of every single inconsistency. I had spent the last 6 months applying my cost accounting standards to his late nights and hidden text messages, quietly building an airtight case file on my own marriage. Exactly 72 hours later, the heavy brass doorknob of our home turned. The sharp click of the deadbolt echoed through the quiet house, cutting over the low hum of traffic from the nearby interstate. Nathan stepped through the threshold, shaking the rain from his coat. He did not return alone. Following close behind him, stepping onto the imported Persian rug, was Audrey. We grew up together, navigating the same upscale Virginia suburbs. She currently worked as a real estate agent, spending her days chasing commission checks and desperately seeking validation from local high society. She wore a tailored trench coat that looked new, her blonde hair perfectly styled, despite the pouring rain outside. As Audrey stood in my foyer, shaking out her damp umbrella, a specific memory surfaced. During the spring of our high school senior year, Audrey borrowed my graduation dress for a weekend. She wore it to a country club party she was not invited to, hoping to impress the old money families she constantly obsessed over. She returned the garment a week later with a torn hem and a sticky sweet-smelling drink stain down the front silk panel. She offered a hollow apology, but her eyes gleamed with a quiet, pathological envy. She always measured her own worth by what she could extract from my life. She wanted my grades, my friend circles, and my possessions. She lived in a constant state of comparison. Now it appeared she wanted my husband. Nathan puffed out his chest, stepping into the center of the foyer. He pulled Audrey closer to his side, gripping her waist with an air of theatrical possession. He looked me in the eye, his jaw set hard. He stated he was not going to hide anymore. He claimed this was his new life, and he was choosing her. He braced himself again, shifting his weight from one foot to the other, anticipating the screaming and the tears he assumed a discarded wife would provide. He wanted a dramatic exit to validate his narrative of our broken marriage. He wanted me to play the role of the tragic victim so he could play the bold hero, chasing true love. Audrey offered a tight, sympathetic frown that failed to reach her eyes. Her gaze drifted past my shoulder, evaluating the intricate crown molding, the imported crystal chandelier, and the expensive artwork lining the hallway. She was taking visual inventory of the kingdom she believed she had just conquered. I felt my pulse maintain a steady, resting rhythm. The scent of Nathan's expensive, woodsy cologne, mixed with Audrey's cheap, overly sweet floral perfume, hung in the damp air, creating a nauseating combination. When a contract auditor discovers a toxic liability, draining a balance sheet, they do not mourn it. They cut it loose to save the remaining secure assets. I did not weep for a man who possessed the strategic foresight of a toddler. I turned my back on them and walked slowly toward the hall closet. I retrieved my sleek, rolling suitcase. The wheels glided silently across the polished wood floor. Nathan blinked as I approached him. His rehearsed defiance cracked under the weight of my silence. He stared at the luggage, his brow furrowing. He asked what I was doing, his voice dropping its authoritative tone. I stepped forward, maintaining my crisp, professional composure. I reached into my coat pocket, feeling the cold metal of my keyring. I pulled the keys out and systematically detached the primary house key. The metal clinked sharply in the quiet room. I did not hand the metal key to Nathan. I extended my hand directly toward Audrey. Dangling from the silver ring was a specific, monogrammed leather keychain. It was a handcrafted piece I purchased during a secure government summit in Washington years ago. The leather was thick, dyed a deep, rich mahogany. Audrey had continuously admired it over the years, subtly hinting she wanted one just like it. She possessed a strange obsession with collecting items that belonged to me, believing that owning my cast-offs would somehow elevate her own status. Audrey saw the leather fob, and her eyes lit up with a greedy sort of triumph. She viewed it as the ultimate trophy of her victory, a physical transfer of my life into her waiting hands. She reached out and snatched the leather fob from my fingers, her manicured nails brushing against my palm. She held it up, inspecting the monogram with a satisfied smirk. She thought she was taking ownership of my colonial home, my husband, and my standing in the local community. She had no idea that stitched seamlessly inside the thick layers of that specific leather keychain was a highly encrypted digital tracking fob. It was standard-issue hardware I utilized for secure federal transit, ensuring sensitive audit documents never went missing. It emitted a constant silent ping to a secure server only my designated devices could access. I was not merely handing over the keys to my home. I was tagging my targets. I watched her clutch the leather tightly against her chest, a victorious smile playing on her lips. She held the very instrument that would chart her downfall. Without uttering another word, I gripped the handle of my suitcase. I walked past them, pulling the heavy front door open to the damp Virginia night. The cool air washed over my face, clearing the cloying scent of their perfumes from my lungs. I stepped out onto the porch, leaving them standing in the quiet foyer. They exchanged confused glances, unsure how to process my lack of resistance. They thought they had won. They thought they had successfully discarded a boring number-obsessed wife to start a glamorous new chapter. They were entirely unaware that the opening move of a devastating audit had just been played. I walked to my car, the rain washing the driveway clean, ready to execute the next phase of the liquidation. The drive from Arlington to my hotel took less than 20 minutes, but the psychological distance covered was immeasurable. I navigated the rain-slicked streets of Virginia with a steady hand, the rhythmic swish of the windshield wipers providing a calming soundtrack. I checked into a premium suite overlooking the Potomac River, bypassing the front desk entirely by using a digital key on my phone. The room was pristine, smelling faintly of starched linen and ozone. I walked over to the floor-to-ceiling window and looked out at the dark water, reflecting the scattered yellow lights of the Capitol. The storm was still raging outside, but inside this sterile, elevated box, the climate was perfectly controlled. I set my rolling suitcase on the luggage rack and unzipped the main compartment. I did not throw this bag together in a frantic panic while my husband confessed his infidelity. I had meticulously packed it 3 weeks ago. A forensic contract auditor never waits for a disaster to strike before locating the emergency exits. We live in the realm of predictive modeling, analyzing behavioral patterns to forecast impending failures. When Nathan began guarding his cell phone, changing his passwords, and working unexplained weekend hours, I did not waste my energy confronting him or crying on a therapist's couch. I simply ran a discreet audit on his life. As I transferred my neatly folded blouses into the hotel dresser, I allowed myself a cold, tight smile. Nathan and Audrey believed they had executed a flawless ambush. They thought my quiet departure was the tragic retreat of a defeated wife, surrendering her most valuable asset. The truth was far more clinical. I did not just abandon a lucrative piece of real estate. I successfully amputated a terminal financial liability. The Arlington House was a stunning piece of colonial architecture, boasting grand white pillars, wraparound porches, and a sprawling manicured lawn. It was the exact type of property Audrey had coveted since our teenage years. Growing up in a cramped rented townhouse on the wrong side of the county, she developed an unhealthy obsession with the outdated facade of Southern aristocracy. She worshipped the illusion of legacy, believing that possessing a grand home would finally grant her entry into the elite Protestant circles of Virginia high society. I knew she wanted the house just as much as she wanted my husband, so I engineered a scenario where she could have both. 8 months prior to Nathan's fabricated European business trip, I noticed glaring discrepancies in the cash flow of his logistics brokerage. He was struggling to secure new federal supply contracts, and his operational overhead was bleeding his margins dry. Nathan was a man ruled by his ego, terrified of appearing unsuccessful to his peers. He began using our personal savings to float his business expenses. I played the role of the concerned, deeply supportive spouse. Sitting across from him at our kitchen island one evening, I gently suggested a risk mitigation strategy. I told him that given the volatile nature of the military contracting sector, we needed to shield our primary residence from potential corporate litigation. I presented a complex, highly structured plan to refinance the colonial estate entirely under his Logistics Limited Liability Company. I stroked his pride, convincing him that holding prime real estate within his corporate portfolio would inflate his balance sheets and impress his investors. Blinded by arrogance and desperate for a financial lifeline, Nathan agreed without hesitation. He never bothered to read the fine print of the documents I drafted. He did not notice that the new mortgage was not a standard fixed-rate agreement. It was a predatory balloon loan. This specific financial instrument offered deceptively low monthly payments for the first year, designed to lure in desperate borrowers before suddenly triggering a catastrophic lump sum payment of the remaining principal. It was a ticking debt bomb. To complete the transaction, I quietly executed a quitclaim deed. With a few strokes of a pen, I legally relinquished all my ownership rights to the property, severing my name from the title, and more importantly, from the staggering debt attached to it. The estate belonged wholly to Nathan and his failing business. When I handed the keys to Nathan in the foyer earlier that evening, I was not surrendering my kingdom. I was locking him and his new mistress inside a burning building. I finished unpacking my toiletries in the marble bathroom, taking a moment to wash my face and apply a fresh layer of moisturizer. I felt remarkably light. The crushing burden of Nathan's financial incompetence had been entirely lifted from my shoulders. I returned to the main room, poured a glass of chilled sparkling water from the minibar, and opened my encrypted laptop on the mahogany desk. Audrey was fiercely predictable. She could never experience a victory without immediately demanding an audience to witness it. I opened a secure browser and navigated to her public social media profiles. The live stream notification was already pulsing at the top of the screen. I clicked the icon, watching the high-definition video load. Audrey was standing in the grand foyer of the Arlington House, the very spot I had vacated less than an hour ago. She had shed her damp trench coat, revealing a tight designer dress. Her blonde hair was fluffed, her makeup flawless. She held her phone high, capturing the sweeping curve of the mahogany staircase and the imported crystal chandelier above her head. She spun in a slow circle, her voice breathless with manufactured excitement. She welcomed her thousands of followers to her new home, framing the betrayal as a beautiful, romantic triumph. She paraded through the living room, running her manicured fingers over the expensive furniture I had selected, praising the craftsmanship as if she had earned it herself. The most fascinating part of the broadcast was the item clutched tightly in her left hand. She proudly displayed the monogrammed leather keychain I had given her, dangling the metal keys for the camera to capture. She giggled, telling her audience that she was finally manifesting the luxury lifestyle she had always deserved. She spoke about building a legacy, about hosting grand dinner parties for the elite defense contractors in our neighborhood. I watched her preen for the camera, studying the desperate hunger in her eyes. The colonial home was nothing more than a hollow stage, set perfectly mirroring the superficial facade Audrey had built her entire personality around. She was bragging to the world about securing a prize, entirely oblivious to the reality that she was standing on a trap door. The balloon mortgage was scheduled to mature in less than 40 days. I took a slow sip of my sparkling water, the carbonation crisp against my tongue. The dramatic irony was exquisite. Audrey believed she had outsmarted me, stealing my husband and my estate to elevate her own social standing. Instead, she had willingly tethered herself to a man whose credit was about to disintegrate. I closed the browser tab, shutting off the sound of her hollow laughter. The first phase of the audit was officially complete. The toxic asset had been successfully transferred. Now Nathan would inevitably try to fund Audrey's expensive tastes to maintain the illusion of their grand new life. He would reach for the joint accounts, expecting the deep reservoir of my professional earnings to subsidize their romance. I opened my banking portal, verifying the digital firewalls I had erected weeks ago, ready to watch his fragile reality fracture the moment he tried to pay the bill. The digital clock on my hotel nightstand flipped to 9 in the evening. I sat in a plush armchair, bathed in the soft glow of a reading lamp, holding a tablet. The encrypted tracking software I had installed inside the leather keychain displayed a blinking green dot moving steadily eastward before coming to a halt on the Maryland border. The coordinates pointed directly to the Chesapeake Bay. I zoomed in on the satellite map, verifying the exact address. Nathan had taken Audrey to the Mariner Club. It is a highly exclusive waterfront establishment, known for flown-in caviar, vintage champagne, and a strict reservation list that requires weeks of advanced planning. Nathan always equated expensive dinners with personal superiority. He needed to sit at a corner table overlooking the dark water, consuming $100 oysters to feel powerful. Taking his new mistress to the Mariner Club was his way of proving he could provide the lavish lifestyle she desperately craved. He assumed he would be paying the exorbitant bill with his premium titanium corporate card. That specific piece of plastic was tied to our primary joint checking account. For the entirety of our marriage, Nathan viewed my income as a communal reservoir he could dip into whenever his logistics brokerage failed to turn a profit. My salary as a federal contractor consistently subsidized his tailored suits and luxury car leases. He possessed an incredible sense of entitlement regarding money I earned through 80-hour work weeks. He never bothered to check the balance, assuming my direct deposits would always be there to cushion his spending habits. A forensic auditor does not leave capital exposed to a compromised entity. 3 weeks before Nathan announced his fabricated European supply chain crisis, I visited our local bank branch. I sat down with a personal banker and executed a quiet, methodical financial severance. I provided the necessary documentation proving which assets were strictly premarital. I then legally redirected all my ongoing professional earnings, consulting fees, and federal reimbursements into an insulated solo account, protected by dual-factor authentication. I did not close the joint account. Closing it would have generated an automated alert to his phone. Instead, I left it active. I allowed Nathan to withdraw the exact sum he claimed he needed for his fake overseas deployment. After his withdrawal, the remaining balance was meticulously calculated. The joint reservoir now held exactly $4.12. The silence of my hotel room was broken by the sharp trill of my cell phone vibrating against the glass coffee table. The caller identification displayed Nathan's name. I let it ring 3 times, allowing his anxiety to peak before I swiped the screen to accept the connection. I did not say hello. I simply held the device to my ear, listening to the chaotic background noise. I could hear the muted clinking of fine silverware and the soft jazz playing in the restaurant lobby. Beneath the ambient sound, the rapid, shallow breathing of a panicking man echoed through the speaker.
"Pamela, what did you do?"
Nathan demanded. His voice was a harsh, breathless whisper stripped of all the arrogant bravado he had displayed in our foyer just hours earlier. He sounded like a cornered animal. My card was declined. The waiter brought the machine to the table and it declined. I handed him the backup card and it declined too. There was a $2,000 hold on this dinner and the terminal says insufficient funds. I leaned back in the armchair, crossing my legs and taking a slow sip of chilled water. The condensation from the glass dampened my fingertips. My pulse remained perfectly steady. I asked him if there was a problem with the logistics firm account. "Do not play games with me," he hissed, the panic elevating his pitch. "You stole the money. You emptied our checking account. I am standing in the lobby of the Mariner Club with the general manager staring at me, and I cannot pay for dinner. Transfer the funds back right now." I set my water glass down, ensuring the base made a quiet, definitive click against the coaster. I corrected his terminology with icy professionalism. I explained that theft involves taking something that does not belong to you. I reminded him that he was the one who drained our communal liquidity 3 days ago to fund his fictitious European business trip. I stated that I merely secured my own direct deposits to ensure my personal financial stability during his absence. "You left me with $4. He choked out, the reality of the situation finally piercing his thick skull. $4.12, I clarified. I suggest you ask your new partner to cover the tab. She is a real estate agent after all. Surely she has the commission from a recent sale to treat you to some oysters. A heavy, suffocating silence fell over the line. Nathan could not ask Audrey to pay. His entire relationship with her was built on the illusion that he was a titan of industry, capable of elevating her social status. If he admitted he was broke, the fantasy would shatter instantly. He muttered a string of desperate curses, pleading with me to authorize a wire transfer just to get him out of the building. He promised he would pay me back, claiming this humiliation was a cruel, unnecessary punishment. I informed him that my banking application was currently offline for scheduled maintenance. I advised him to speak with the restaurant manager about a payment plan. I ended the call pressing the red icon and plunging the room back into pristine silence. Though I was miles away, the sequence of events unfolding in that waterfront lobby was entirely predictable. The general manager of an establishment like the Mariner Club does not tolerate unpaid tabs from distressed patrons. I knew Nathan was currently standing under the ornate crystal chandeliers, sweating profusely in his tailored jacket. The manager would maintain a polite but firm demeanor, blocking the exit. With zero liquid capital and a frozen line of credit, Nathan had only one option left to avoid the police being called. He would have to unbuckle his designer watch. The heavy gold timepiece was his prized possession, a status symbol he wore to project dominance in every boardroom he entered. He would be forced to hand it over to a stranger as collateral, trading his dignity for a plate of seafood. He would have to sign a promissory note under the watchful eye of the security staff, promising to return with cash the following day. The true victory did not lie in Nathan losing his watch. The true victory was the audience witnessing the transaction. Audrey had followed him into the lobby, expecting him to swiftly resolve a simple banking error. She stood a few feet away, clutching her designer evening bag, watching the man she thought was her golden ticket barter his jewelry like a desperate pawnshop customer. For Audrey, perception was reality. She required a partner who commanded respect and possessed endless resources. Watching Nathan flush red with embarrassment, stripped of his purchasing power, cracked the very foundation of her attraction to him. The lavish evening she planned to document for her followers had ended in profound humiliation. She walked out of the restaurant doors into the damp night air beside a man who suddenly seemed much smaller than the one she had stolen. The first deep seed of doubt took root in her mind. Nathan would spend the entire silent car ride back to Arlington trying to spin the disaster. He would blame the bank, blame the economy, and blame me. Audrey would nod and offer hollow words of support, but her calculating mind was already spinning. She needed to secure her position in Virginia high society, and Nathan was rapidly proving to be an unreliable vessel. If he could not provide the status she craved, she would have to overcompensate and forge those connections herself. She would need to actively infiltrate the very circles I had navigated for years, setting the stage for a spectacular public collision. The morning after the seafood restaurant humiliation, Audrey woke up needing to immediately rewrite reality. She could not process the image of Nathan surrendering his designer watch to cover a dinner tab. To a woman whose entire self-worth relied on proximity to wealth, that kind of financial impotence was a glaring red flag. Instead of confronting him, she chose to bury her doubts beneath a frantic campaign of social conquest. If Nathan could not provide the flawless, opulent lifestyle she demanded, she would manufacture the illusion herself by seizing my position within local high society. Northern Virginia possesses a very specific social ecosystem. It is a rigid hierarchy built on the intersection of military brass, defense contracting, and old Southern money. For years, I navigated this world with quiet efficiency, securing a seat on the board of the Potomac Veterans Initiative. We organized high-profile galas, directing funds toward wounded service members. The women who ran these committees traded heavily on the security clearances and corporate titles of their husbands. I was a rare exception, sitting at the table solely because of my own federal auditing credentials. Audrey always resented my access to these women. She viewed my charitable obligations as exclusive networking opportunities I selfishly withheld from her real estate aspirations. Now armed with the keys to my colonial home, she launched a deliberate infiltration. Audrey possessed a weaponized charm, a syrupy sweetness she utilized to manipulate perceptions. She contacted a peripheral acquaintance on the charity committee, requesting a guest pass to the upcoming spring luncheon. Once inside the country club, she began circulating her fabricated narrative. She did not loudly proclaim herself a homewrecker. Instead, she played the role of a reluctant savior. She pulled women aside, speaking in hushed, sympathetic tones. She painted a portrait of my marriage as a desolate, frozen wasteland. She described me as an unfeeling workaholic who cared more about spreadsheets than my own family. She spun a tale of Nathan suffering in silent agony, starved for affection, until he finally crumbled under my relentless neglect. According to her fiction, they had simply found solace in each other, fighting a forbidden love they could no longer deny. The gossip spread through the country club faster than a spilled glass of iced tea. People inherently crave a scandal, especially one that allows them to feel superior. By the time I arrived at the Alexandria Country Club for our scheduled board luncheon, the atmosphere in the dining room had fundamentally shifted. I handed my coat to the attendant and stepped onto the plush carpet. The sensory feedback was immediate. Conversations abruptly ceased as I passed various tables. The ambient noise of clinking silver and light laughter dissolved into a stiff, awkward silence. Women I had known for half a decade suddenly found the floral centerpieces fascinating, refusing to meet my gaze. A few offered tight, strained smiles that did not reach their eyes. The air conditioning felt 10 degrees colder. They were actively ostracizing me, choosing the entertaining lie of the new mistress over the steady truth of the discarded wife. Audrey sat at the center table holding court. She wore a tailored pastel dress, radiating a frantic, triumphant energy. She was surrounded by the wives of prominent logistics executives and retired generals, basking in their undivided attention. She had successfully usurped my social standing, turning my supposed friends into her sympathetic audience. I did not flinch. I walked gracefully to my assigned seat, maintaining a posture of perfect, unbothered professionalism. An auditor learns early in their career never to react to intimidation tactics. When a scrutinized executive attempts to make you feel unwelcome in their boardroom, you simply open your ledger and begin the math. I looked around the dining room objectively, calculating the true value of the women turning their backs on me. They were superficial liabilities. Their friendships were transactional, contingent upon projecting a flawless suburban facade. They relied entirely on their spouses for their status, terrified of a single rumor tarnishing their carefully curated lives. I did not need them. I possessed my own top-secret clearance, my own income, and my own impeccable reputation. Their cold stares were not a punishment. They were a highly efficient filtration system, removing dead weight from my network. I ordered a sparkling mineral water and reviewed the committee budget reports resting beside my plate. Audrey, noticing my lack of visible distress, escalated her performance. She raised her voice, ensuring her words carried across the crisp white linens to my table. She was boasting about a gift Nathan had presented to her that morning to celebrate their fresh start. She reached up her fingers, delicately tracing a strand of pearls resting against her collarbone. She described the necklace as a breathtaking antique, claiming Nathan had purchased it from a private dealer in Georgetown. She preened under the admiring coos of the women sitting beside her, selling the jewelry as undeniable proof of his boundless devotion and immense wealth. I glanced up from my paperwork, allowing my eyes to focus on the necklace. I did not need a jeweler's loupe to identify the piece. My analytical mind processed the visual data instantly. The pearls were unusually uniform, lacking the subtle, natural imperfections of authentic gems. More importantly, the clasp resting near the nape of her neck caught the light. It was an ornate silver-tone latch, shaped like a stylized rose. I recognized that exact clasp. 2 years into our marriage, I uncovered a discreet line item on Nathan's credit card statement, detailing a bulk purchase from a wholesale synthetic jewelry distributor based out of a warehouse in Maryland. When confronted, he smoothly lied, claiming they were inexpensive corporate gifts for his female administrative staff. Over the next 3 years, I noticed that specific rose clasp appearing on the necks of various women in our peripheral social circles, right before they abruptly stopped attending our dinner parties. It was his signature parting gift, a cheap, shiny trinket he used to buy the silence of his brief, careless indiscretions. He had not visited an antique dealer in Georgetown. He had simply reached into the back of his closet and handed Audrey a leftover replica from his infidelity stockpile. The luncheon concluded with a serving of coffee and small pastries. The board president, a formidable woman named Madeline, stood near the exit, thanking guests for their attendance. Madeline was the wife of a defense contractor who specialized in naval systems. She valued authenticity and held a quiet disdain for flashy displays of unearned wealth. I gathered my files and approached her, extending my hand. We exchanged pleasantries, discussing a recent audit protocol regarding veteran housing grants. As we spoke, Audrey glided past us, her chin held high, her fingers still resting proudly on her fake pearls. She offered Madeline a bright, overly sweet smile, attempting to solidify her new connection. I leaned in slightly, lowering my voice to a casual conversational volume. I did not sound bitter or angry. I sounded like a helpful colleague correcting a minor accounting error. "It is fascinating to see Audrey wearing that specific piece," I murmured, keeping my gaze fixed on Madeline. Madeline raised an eyebrow, following my line of sight to the necklace. "She mentioned Nathan acquired it from a private estate collection." "Nathan purchased a dozen of those synthetic strands from a wholesale catalog 4 years ago," I stated, my tone crisp and factual. "The base metal in that rose clasp contains a high nickel alloy. It tends to turn the skin green after prolonged exposure to humidity. You might want to advise her to coat it in clear nail polish before the summer gala." I delivered the information with surgical precision. I did not insult Audrey directly. I simply stated a verifiable fact that entirely dismantled the foundation of her bragging. Madeline's eyes widened fractionally. The implications landed instantly. The grand romantic gesture was a cheap bulk order imitation. She looked at Audrey, then looked back at me, a slow understanding dawning on her face. The polite illusion had shattered, revealing the tacky, desperate reality underneath. "I see," Madeline replied, her voice tight with suppressed amusement. "Thank you for the insight, Pamela. Enjoy your afternoon." I walked out of the country club, leaving the seed of truth to germinate. High society thrives on whispered humiliations. Madeline would not keep that information to herself. She would share it, quietly, over tennis matches and afternoon cocktails. The rumor would ripple through the very women Audrey was desperately trying to impress. Every time Audrey wore the necklace, they would nod and smile, while silently judging the cheap metal clasp and the hollow lie it represented. Audrey would eventually notice the shifting gazes and the stifled laughter behind her back. She would feel the social ground crumbling beneath her feet, but she would not understand why. The subtle wound would fester, consuming her attention. She would dedicate all her energy to decoding the sudden condescension of her new peers, constantly adjusting her behavior to regain their approval. Her desperation for societal validation would become an all-encompassing distraction. She would be too busy fighting a shadow war at the country club to notice the real storm gathering on the horizon. While she guarded her fragile pride, I drove back to my hotel, energized by the encounter. The social skirmish was a necessary diversion, ensuring no one was paying attention to my next maneuver. The true battlefield was not a dining room in Alexandria. It was the digital ledger of Nathan's failing logistics firm. And I was preparing to log in. The glow of the laptop screen cast sharp shadows across the hotel desk. Outside the window, the Potomac River flowed silently under the cover of a moonless Virginia night. My phone rested beside the keyboard, displaying the encrypted tracking software. A single pulsing green dot moved steadily across the digital map. While Audrey was likely tossing in her sleep, obsessing over the cheap clasp of her fake pearl necklace, Nathan was on the move. It was approaching midnight. The coordinates showed his vehicle navigating a desolate stretch of highway before turning into an isolated industrial sector near the county border. I zoomed in on the satellite imagery, verifying the terrain. The location was a cluster of dilapidated warehouses, surrounded by rusted chain-link fencing. A logistics broker handling premium military supply chains possessed zero legitimate reason to visit a decaying storage facility under the cover of darkness.
To understand his physical destination, I needed digital context.
6 years ago, when Nathan first launched his brokerage, he possessed a profound ignorance of corporate finance. He understood networking and glad handing, but the actual mechanics of ledger balancing eluded him. He begged me to construct his foundational accounting infrastructure. I spent weeks writing the core code, establishing the billing hierarchies, compliance protocols, and internal audit triggers. Nathan is a creature of habit, driven by a deep administrative laziness. He hired IT contractors to update the superficial user interfaces over the years to make the dashboards look sleek for his investors. He never bothered to migrate the core database or alter the root administrative access permissions I originally installed. He operated under the assumption that his complex passwords provided adequate security. He was deeply mistaken. I accessed his network, bypassing the external firewall with a sequence of legacy keystrokes. I entered the main directory unhindered. The digital environment was cluttered, reflecting his chaotic operational style. Folders were misnamed, and expense reports were filed haphazardly. I sorted the datasets, focusing exclusively on his federal procurement contracts. I stood up and brewed a fresh cup of dark roast coffee using the machine on the kitchenette counter. The bitter aroma filled the sterile room, grounding my senses. The digital clock on the nightstand clicked to 3 in the morning. The quiet solitude of the early hours provides the perfect environment for a forensic audit. Numbers do not lie. They leave a pristine, undeniable trail for anyone trained to read the language of currency. I pulled the invoicing records submitted directly to the Department of Defense. Nathan operated as a middleman, securing transport components for military supply chains. He sourced parts from manufacturers and delivered them to federal assembly plants. I initiated a comparative analysis, cross-referencing his raw purchase orders against the submitted federal invoices. The profit margins displayed on my screen were staggering. I isolated a specific contract for tactical hydraulic valves used in armored personnel carriers. The purchase orders proved he was procuring low-grade commercial fasteners from overseas suppliers. The corresponding invoices submitted to the government claimed he was providing high-grade, domestically manufactured tactical components. The markup was astronomical. He was siphoning hundreds of thousands of dollars through inflated invoices on a single contract. I expanded the search parameters, applying the same algorithm to his entire federal portfolio. The red flags multiplied, spreading across the ledger like a virus. This was not a simple accounting error or a minor clerical oversight. It was a systemic, calculated scheme to defraud the United States government. He was stealing taxpayer funds, utilizing his brokerage as a vehicle for grand larceny. Stealing federal funds requires a sophisticated mechanism to wash the dirty capital. He could not deposit government checks into his personal checking account without triggering an immediate agency inquiry. I traced the vendor payments following the outgoing cash flow. The capital was routed to a series of obscure third-party suppliers, categorized as specialized logistics consultants. I opened a secondary browser tab digging into the state corporate registry database. I checked the tax identification numbers of these specific suppliers. They were ghost companies. They possessed no active operational footprint, no employee payroll records, and no registered commercial fleets. They existed solely on paper to generate fake invoices, giving Nathan a reason to transfer the stolen funds out of his primary accounts. I pulled the registered physical addresses for these shell entities. My eyes scanned the glowing text on the monitor, processing the raw data. The listed headquarters for 3 distinct fraudulent vendors routed back to a single residential address in a modest Fairfax suburb. It was a brick walk-up apartment building. It was Audrey's old apartment, the puzzle pieces interlocked with terrifying clarity. Nathan did not just seduce my childhood friend. He recruited an active accomplice. Audrey utilized her real estate license and her knowledge of property registries to establish fake commercial leases, giving his ghost companies a veneer of legitimacy. She provided the crucial infrastructure needed to launder the stolen cash. They were conspiring together to defraud the Department of Defense. The penalty for felony wire fraud involving federal defense contracts carries severe mandatory minimum sentencing guidelines. The Department of Justice does not negotiate lenient plea deals for contractors who compromise military supply chains. I leaned back in the ergonomic chair, staring at the glowing monitor. The entire nature of my separation had shifted. This was no longer a domestic dispute over a broken marriage or a toxic balloon mortgage. I was staring at undeniable proof of a federal crime. I held the power to send them both to a penitentiary for decades. The leverage I now possessed was insurmountable. I exported the raw data, compiling a secure, encrypted dossier on my external hard drive. I needed to handle this information with extreme caution. Detonating this evidence prematurely would cause a chaotic fallout. Before I handed this pristine case file to the federal authorities, I needed to ensure my own perimeter was entirely secured against any collateral damage. If the government froze his assets, they would freeze everything attached to his name. I needed a legal shield. I closed the laptop as the first pale light of dawn broke over the Potomac River, painting the sky in shades of bruised purple and gray. I reached for my coffee cup, but stopped as my phone buzzed on the desk. The sudden vibration shattered the quiet focus of the room. An incoming text message illuminated the screen. The sender was Patricia, my mother. I opened the message, reading the paragraphs of dense, demanding text. She was ordering my presence at her traditional Sunday brunch. The language dripped with Protestant Southern gentility, masking a core of rigid judgment. She explicitly mentioned that Nathan and Audrey would be attending the gathering. She insisted I needed to be reasonable, put aside my vindictive behavior, and attend the brunch to save face in front of our elite community. She framed my absence as an unforgivable breach of etiquette. She was actively choosing the fabricated charm of her fraudulent son-in-law over the well-being of her own daughter. The battlefront was fracturing, multiplying the threats. The war was expanding from the digital ledgers to the dining room table. The digital glow of my phone screen cut through the dimly lit hotel room, illuminating the demanding text message from Patricia. My mother is a woman constructed entirely of rigid social expectations and Protestant Southern gentility. She views life not as a series of authentic experiences, but as a carefully curated performance where appearances dictate absolute value. She spent my childhood attempting to mold me into a compliant, decorative accessory suitable for country club luncheons. When I chose a demanding career in federal auditing over early marriage and charity galas, she viewed it as a personal failure. Nathan, with his tailored suits and smooth, fabricated charm, was the son she always wanted. He spoke her language of superficial status effortlessly, navigating her elite circles. Her text message was a masterclass in manipulation. She ordered my attendance at her traditional Sunday brunch, a weekly gathering held in the sunroom of her sprawling estate in Great Falls. The guest list always included prominent local figures, retired politicians, wealthy defense contractors, and their meticulously styled wives. Patricia explicitly stated that Nathan and Audrey would be present. She framed their attendance not as a betrayal, but as a necessary step toward moving forward with grace. She demanded I cease my vindictive behavior, commanding me to accept the new reality to save face within our community. In her twisted logic, a public divorce was far more shameful than the infidelity that caused it. I did not reply to the message. I simply set the phone face down on the desk, the encrypted dossier of Nathan's federal crimes resting securely on my external drive nearby. The battle lines were drawing closer, pulling my own blood into the crossfire.
I arrived at the Great Falls estate precisely at 11 on Sunday morning.
The sweeping driveway was lined with luxury vehicles. I parked my modest sedan near the rear entrance, avoiding the valet. I wore a structured navy blazer and tailored slacks, a sharp contrast to the pastel floral dresses favored by my mother's inner circle. The scent of freshly brewed coffee, expensive perfume, and warm pastries drifted through the heavy oak doors as I stepped into the foyer. The sunroom was a cacophony of polite laughter and clinking silverware. Sunlight streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows, illuminating the pristine white linens and the elaborate silver chafing dishes. I scanned the room, my analytical gaze cutting through the superficial cheer. Patricia stood near the mimosa station, holding court. She wore a pristine, cream-colored dress, her posture rigid, her smile practiced and bright. Standing directly beside her, gripping a crystal champagne flute, was Audrey. She wore a conservative, expensive-looking sundress, likely funded by Nathan's rapidly dwindling credit. Nathan stood a few feet away, engaging a retired Navy admiral in an animated conversation about supply chain logistics. He projected an aura of invincible success, completely unaware that his digital footprint was currently resting on my hotel desk, ready to destroy him. Patricia spotted me. Her smile faltered for a fraction of a second before hardening into a mask of stern, maternal authority. She set her glass down and glided across the room, intercepted me before I could reach the buffet. She grasped my arm, her manicured fingers digging into my blazer sleeve, and steered me toward the quiet hallway leading to the library. "I am glad you decided to be reasonable, Pamela." Patricia hissed her voice low and sharp, ensuring the guests could not hear. "I expect you to behave today. No scenes, no drama." I pulled my arm free, stepping back to establish a physical boundary. "You invited the man who abandoned your daughter and the woman he left with to a family gathering? You are actively validating a homewrecker." Patricia sighed a sound dripping with condescending patience. "Nathan is a prominent businessman. He has deep ties to this community. I will not have my social standing jeopardized by your inability to keep a husband." The victim blaming was swift and unapologetic. She leaned closer, her perfume cloying in the narrow hallway. "You drove him away, Pamela. You work 80-hour weeks, you never attend the charity galas, you refused to prioritize his needs. Men like Nathan require a supportive partner, not a cold, calculating auditor. Audrey understands that." I stared at the woman who raised me, registering the profound depth of her betrayal. She was not just choosing Nathan's fabricated wealth. She was actively punishing me for my independence. She preferred the comfortable lie of Audrey's sycophantic devotion over the inconvenient truth of my success. "Nathan is a sinking ship, Mother," I stated, my voice completely devoid of emotion. "He is drowning in debt, and he is pulling Audrey down with him. You are aligning yourself with a liability." Patricia scoffed, waving her hand dismissively. "He just secured a massive new contract. He told me himself. You are just jealous because he is thriving without you. Now go back in there, smile, and act like a civilized adult." She turned on her heel and marched back into the sunroom. I followed, slowly maintaining my clinical detachment. The scene unfolding near the buffet table provided the ultimate, undeniable confirmation of my mother's loyalty. Patricia had gathered a small group of influential women around Audrey. She was introducing her not as a guest, but as a permanent fixture. With a grand theatrical gesture, Patricia reached onto a nearby side table and retrieved a thick, leather-bound book. I recognized it instantly. It was the family recipe book, a collection of handwritten notes and generational culinary secrets passed down through the women in our lineage. It was a tangible symbol of inclusion, a sacred artifact within our family structure. Patricia smiled warmly, handing the heavy book directly to Audrey. "For your new home," my mother announced, her voice projecting clearly across the room. "We must ensure Nathan is properly fed, after all." Audrey accepted the book, clutching it to her chest. She looked at me over Patricia's shoulder, a triumphant, venomous smirk playing on her lips. She believed she had won the ultimate victory. She had stolen my husband, my house, and now my mother's approval. The women surrounding them cooed in delight, oblivious to the profound cruelty of the gesture. They clapped softly, validating the transfer of the daughter role to a woman who had spent her entire life trying to consume my identity. I did not weep. I did not scream. I did not storm out in a hysterical fit of rage. I stood near the doorway, analyzing the transaction with surgical precision. Patricia had just severed our familial bond in front of an audience, choosing an illusion over her own blood. She had effectively removed the final emotional constraint holding me back. If my mother was willing to publicly discard me to protect her social standing, I owed her no protection from the impending fallout. When Nathan's federal crimes were exposed, the scandal would obliterate her carefully curated world. She would be forced to explain why she handed a family heirloom to a convicted felon. I turned away from the sunroom, leaving the brunch without saying goodbye. The crisp air outside felt cleansing. I walked to my car, my mind already shifting to the next tactical maneuver. The emotional battlefield was closed. I had shed my last vulnerability. It was time to secure my assets and build an impenetrable legal firewall, ensuring that when Nathan finally crashed, he could not use the divorce courts to drag me down with him. I needed an attorney who operated with the same ruthless efficiency I did, and I knew exactly who to call. The drive from Great Falls back toward Alexandria was a blur of highway markers and the steady hum of tires on asphalt. The emotional severing from my mother was complete. I felt no lingering sadness, only a sharp, crystalline focus. The battlefield was clear. Nathan's federal fraud would eventually implode, dragging Audrey and, potentially, my mother into the blast radius. But before that federal hammer fell, Nathan's immediate threat was financial. He was a man accustomed to subsidizing his failing business with my stable income. His recent humiliation at the seafood restaurant would have made him desperate. Desperate men do not play fair, especially when they feel entitled to the wealth of the woman they just discarded. Nathan understood the mechanics of divorce proceedings just well enough to be dangerous. In Virginia, equitable distribution rules meant he would inevitably attempt to lay claim to my defense consulting firm and the assets I had built over the last 6 years. He would hire aggressive litigators funded by the stolen federal money to drag out the settlement, hoping to starve me out financially. I needed a legal mechanism so robust, so impenetrable, that it would render my entire net worth mathematically untouchable. I needed David. David is my older sister's husband, a senior partner at a high-stakes corporate law firm in Washington, D.C. While my mother despised him for his working-class background and lack of inherited pedigree, David and I shared a profound mutual respect. We both understood that true power is not born from social connections, it is built through relentless, meticulous competence. David specialized in complex asset protection and international corporate structuring. He was the exact architect I needed to build my firewall. I did not call him. Digital communications leave a trail subject to discovery in future litigation. Instead, I drove directly to a specific diner in Alexandria, a place we both frequented during our early, grueling years of establishing our respective careers. The diner was a relic of neon and chrome, a stark contrast to the polished mahogany boardrooms David usually inhabited. The rain had intensified, casting long, wavering reflections of the neon signs across the wet pavement. I slid into a vinyl booth near the back, ordering black coffee. 10 minutes later, David walked through the double doors, shaking the rain from his dark wool trench coat. He spotted me immediately, his expression shifting from fatigue to sharp, analytical concern. He slid into the booth opposite me, waving off the waitress with a brief nod. I did not waste time on pleasantries. I laid out the situation with forensic precision. I detailed Nathan's infidelity, the fabricated European trip, and the toxic balloon mortgage I had secured around his neck. Then I revealed the federal wire fraud, the ghost companies, and the impending implosion of his logistics firm. I watched David process the information, his legal mind analyzing the vectors of liability. He leaned forward, resting his forearms on the Formica table. "He is going to panic," David stated, his voice a low, steady rumble. "The moment he realizes you severed his access to your primary accounts, he will start hunting for soft targets. He will try to liquidate shared investments or tap into older, forgotten escrow lines." David was exactly right. During the first year of our marriage, before I fully grasped Nathan's financial incompetence, we had established a secondary escrow account intended for emergency property repairs. It was a vestigial financial appendage, largely ignored, but it still carried both our names. I had focused on securing my primary earnings, leaving this specific account exposed. I pulled my encrypted tablet from my briefcase, connecting to a secure virtual private network. I accessed the banking portal for that specific escrow account. The screen loaded, displaying a balance of $75,000. My pulse spiked. Below the balance, a pending transaction notification glowed in red text. An automated clearinghouse transfer had been initiated less than 30 minutes ago. Nathan was attempting to drain the account, routing the funds directly to a routing number I recognized from the ghost companies he operated with Audrey. "He found it," I said, turning the tablet toward David. "He is trying to move $75,000 right now. The transfer is pending authorization." David's eyes scanned the screen, his demeanor shifting into active combat mode. "We have a narrow window before the batch processing clears. We cannot simply cancel the transfer without triggering a fraud alert that might tip his hand prematurely. We need to move the underlying assets out of his legal reach entirely, rendering the transaction void." David pulled a thick manila envelope from his briefcase, sliding it across the table. It contained a comprehensive legal framework for an irrevocable trust. This was not a standard living trust subject to amendment. It was an aggressive, ironclad legal entity designed to sever personal wealth from toxic liabilities permanently. He explained the mechanics rapidly. By transferring my consulting firm, my personal savings, and the remaining liquid capital into this specific trust, I was legally relinquishing direct ownership. The trust would become an independent entity, insulated from marital claims, civil litigation, and the impending federal fallout. I would designate myself as the primary beneficiary, retaining access to the yields, but the core assets would be locked behind a legal vault. "Once you sign this," David warned, his gaze intense, "the transfer is permanent. You are essentially hiding your wealth from the legal system by turning it over to the trust. It is the only way to ensure Nathan cannot touch a single cent." I picked up the heavy brass pen he offered. I did not hesitate. I flipped through the dense pages of legal jargon, finding the signature lines. The diner buzzed around us, the clatter of plates and the murmur of conversation masking the profound shift in power occurring in our booth. I signed my name with deliberate, forceful strokes, executing the asset transfers, the corporate restructuring, and the final severance of my financial ties to Nathan. As I signed the final page, David was already typing furiously on his laptop, filing the digitized documents with the state registry and notifying the corresponding financial institutions. The legal machinery hummed into motion, executing the transfers at light speed. I watched the screen of my tablet. The pending automated clearinghouse transfer Nathan had initiated still blinked in red. We waited in tense silence, the rain lashing against the diner window. The digital clock on my screen ticked forward, approaching the top of the hour, the standard processing window for the bank's batch transfers. The screen refreshed. The red pending notification vanished. In its place, a stark, bold message appeared. "Transaction declined. Insufficient underlying assets." David exhaled a long, slow breath, closing his laptop with a definitive snap. The trust is established. The funds have been successfully rerouted into the protected entity. His transfer bounced. A profound sense of security settled over me, replacing the adrenaline with cold, calculated calm. I looked down at the signed documents, the physical manifestation of my independence. Nathan had just attempted a desperate financial strike, hoping to secure the cash needed to maintain his illusion of wealth for Audrey. Instead, he hit a solid brick wall. David slid the documents back into the envelope, sealing it carefully. He looked at me, a rare, genuine smile touching the corners of his mouth. He is going to receive the decline notification in a few minutes. He is going to realize that he has absolutely zero access to your capital. You are mathematically untouchable, Pamela. He has officially walked into a legal buzzsaw. I took a final sip of my coffee, the bitter taste grounding me. The defensive phase of my strategy was complete. My assets were secure, my mother's betrayal was neutralized, and Nathan was entirely cut off from his primary financial lifeline. He was trapped with Audrey in a colonial home they could not afford, funding a lifestyle on borrowed time with federal crimes lurking in his ledger. Nathan's desperation would soon curdle into rage. With his access to my wealth severed, he would seek to strike back, using the only weapon he believed he still possessed: my professional reputation. He would try to tear down my career to force a settlement, entirely unaware that attacking an auditor only invites a more thorough investigation. I gathered my belongings, ready to face the smear campaign I knew was inevitably coming. The transition from the rain-slicked diner in Alexandria to the sterile, bright corridors of my federal workspace required a precise mental recalibration. Monday morning arrived with a crisp, unforgiving chill. I badged into the secure defense contractor facility located just miles from the Pentagon, navigating the complex series of biometric checkpoints. The heavy steel doors hissed shut behind me, sealing away the turbulent remnants of my weekend. Inside this fortress of data and compliance, my personal life ceased to exist. I was no longer a discarded wife navigating a treacherous divorce. I was a senior auditor, holding a top-secret, sensitive, compartmented information clearance. My entire existence within these walls relied on my unshakable stability and pristine reputation. I settled into my ergonomic chair, logging into the encrypted mainframe to review a pending aviation supply audit. Before the initial security protocols could even finish loading, my desk phone issued a sharp, piercing ring. The caller identification display glowed with a sequence of internal digits that instantly heightened my senses. It was the office of the Inspector General. The voice on the other end belonged to an administrative assistant who requested my immediate presence in an interrogation suite on the 4th floor. The tone was devoid of professional courtesy. It was a summons. Walking toward the elevators, my analytical mind immediately began running probability models. A sudden, unannounced meeting with the Inspector General usually signaled a severe breach of protocol. Last month, I had finalized a rigorous investigation into a prominent aerospace manufacturer, uncovering vast discrepancies in their billing practices. That specific corporation possessed deep political connections and teams of ruthless defense attorneys. I assumed they were initiating a retaliatory strike, attempting to discredit my findings by launching a formal grievance against my methodology. I prepared myself for a high-level bureaucratic skirmish. I mentally categorized my supporting documentation, ready to defend every single spreadsheet and cost analysis I had submitted. The interrogation suite was a windowless room, illuminated by harsh fluorescent lights that buzzed with a low, constant frequency. The air felt stale, cooled by an overactive ventilation system. Sitting across the polished aluminum table was Investigator Mitchell. He was a veteran of internal affairs, possessing a rigid posture and eyes that scanned his environment with practiced suspicion. He did not offer his hand for a greeting. He simply gestured to the empty metal chair opposite him. I took my seat, keeping my spine perfectly straight. I folded my hands on the table, maintaining a steady, unblinking gaze. Mitchell opened a thin gray folder, sliding a single printed sheet of paper across the cold metal surface. He informed me that the department had received an anonymous tip over the weekend through their secure external portal. The complaint alleged that I was actively leaking classified audit data to foreign corporate competitors. Furthermore, the tipster claimed this treasonous behavior was the direct result of severe emotional instability stemming from a recent marital separation. The accusation was designed to be a lethal blow. In my line of work, even the mere suggestion of emotional compromise is enough to trigger an immediate suspension of clearance. Without that clearance, I would be escorted from the building, stripped of my income, and rendered entirely defenseless in a divorce court. The strategy was devious. I reached out and picked up the printed email. The paper felt dry and coarse against my fingertips. I expected to read a highly sophisticated piece of corporate sabotage drafted by a team of expensive lawyers. I prepared to analyze complex legal jargon and manipulated data points. Instead, as my eyes scanned the opening paragraph, a profound sense of cold amusement washed over my initial tension. An auditor does not simply read a document. We deconstruct it. We search for patterns, inconsistencies, and underlying structural flaws. The anonymous complaint was a masterpiece of sloppy execution. The author had attempted to utilize formal bureaucratic language, but they lacked the necessary intellect to sustain the illusion. The text was riddled with specific linguistic fingerprints that I recognized instantly. The tipster misused the word effect instead of affect in the second sentence. They deployed a very distinct incorrect passive voice structure, claiming that the data was being distributed irregardless of the federal consequences. I stared at that specific non-standard word, irregardless. It was a glaring grammatical error that Nathan used constantly during his business pitches, despite my repeated corrections over our 6-year marriage. Further down the page, the author misspelled the word logistics, utilizing a double consonant structure that Nathan frequently typed in his hasty text messages. The realization crystallized with sharp, undeniable clarity. This was not a calculated strike from a retaliatory aerospace corporation. This was Nathan, cut off from my personal wealth and humiliated by the bounced escrow transfer. He had grown desperate. He realized he could not starve me out financially as long as I held my lucrative government position. He needed to destroy my earning potential to force a swift, favorable divorce settlement. He assumed that a simple anonymous email would trigger panic within the department, leading to my immediate termination. He wanted to break my leverage. I aligned the edges of the paper, tapping them gently against the aluminum table. I looked up, meeting Mitchell's waiting gaze. He was observing my micro-expressions, searching for the telltale signs of panic or defensive rage that usually accompany a guilty conscience. I offered him neither. I opened my leather portfolio and retrieved a separate, pristine document. I slid it across the table toward him. I kept my voice entirely level, employing the crisp, measured tone of a professional correcting a minor filing error. I informed Investigator Mitchell that he was currently holding my latest psychological evaluation. I reminded him that my specific clearance tier required comprehensive mental health screenings every 6 months. The document detailed my exceptional stress tolerance, my emotional stability, and my unwavering adherence to security protocols. I pointed out that the evaluation had been finalized and signed by a department-approved psychiatrist just 3 weeks prior, making it undeniable proof of my psychological fortitude. Mitchell glanced at the evaluation, his rigid posture relaxing by a fraction of an inch. I did not stop there. I verbally dismantled the logistical mechanics of the anonymous claim. I informed him that my internal network access logs would verify I had not downloaded or transmitted any classified datasets outside of authorized secure channels. I invited him to pull my digital footprint, emphasizing that a genuine corporate spy would never leave the chaotic, sloppy trail suggested by this poorly written email. I watched the skepticism in Mitchell's eyes pivot from me toward the anonymous tip. The federal investigator was beginning to realize he was wasting his time on a domestic dispute masquerading as an espionage threat. The tension in the windowless room evaporated, replaced by the dry routine of bureaucratic dismissal. I gathered my portfolio, preparing to stand. I had successfully defended my clearance, neutralizing Nathan's frantic attempt to ruin my career. But surviving the ambush was not enough. I needed to turn his crude weapon back against him. I needed to guide the federal gaze directly toward the fraudulent empire he was trying to protect. I paused, resting my hand on the back of the metal chair. I looked at the printed complaint one last time, offering a thoughtful, measured observation. I noted that the anonymous author had utilized an unencrypted public email server to submit the tip through the department portal. I stated that true corporate espionage agents employ complex routing networks to mask their digital origins. This submission, however, appeared remarkably amateur. I suggested to Investigator Mitchell that his cybersecurity team pull the specific IP address associated with the incoming message. I told him that such a careless, unrefined attempt at character assassination usually originates from a localized, unsecured network. I mentioned casually that tracing the origin might reveal a frustrated individual operating out of a local commercial space rather than a foreign intelligence hub. I knew exactly where that IP address would lead. Nathan was too lazy to visit a public library or utilize a secure virtual private network. He undoubtedly drafted and sent that spiteful email from the desktop computer sitting in his logistics brokerage office. When the Inspector General traced the signal, they would find themselves knocking on the digital door of his failing business. They would begin poking around his network, searching for a disgruntled tipster, and instead, they would stumble right into the chaotic, messy architecture of his federal wire fraud. I thanked Mitchell for his time and walked out of the interrogation suite. My security clearance remained pristine. The smear campaign had failed entirely. Nathan had tried to strip away my armor, and in doing so, he had inadvertently painted a glowing target on his own back. His failure today would only amplify his panic. The balloon mortgage on the Arlington house was ticking closer to maturity, and his cash reserves were effectively zero. He would be searching desperately for a massive influx of capital to fund Audrey's expensive illusions and save his failing company. He needed a lifeline. He needed a miracle. I navigated the bright corridors, heading back to my desk ready to manufacture the exact miracle he was praying for. I was going to feed him a poisoned contract and watch him swallow it whole. The transition from the interrogation room back to my desk carried a distinct sense of momentum. Defeating the anonymous clearance threat provided a brief rush of satisfaction, but my broader objective required unyielding discipline. Nathan was reeling from his failed attempt to destroy my career. He possessed zero access to my capital, and the balloon mortgage on the Arlington property ticked closer to detonation every single day. Desperation makes a man predictable. He needed a financial lifeline to sustain the grand illusion he had promised his new mistress. I decided to offer him a rope, fully intending to watch him tie his own noose. My workstation glowed with streams of secure federal procurement data. The Department of Defense operates a labyrinthine network of bidding portals. Most civilian contractors view these databases as a gold rush, seeing only the multi-million-dollar payouts. They fail to comprehend the lethal compliance structures hidden within the fine print. I filtered the active solicitations, searching for a very specific type of agreement. We call them widowmakers. These are requests for proposal that promise astronomical revenue, but harbor catastrophic penalty clauses designed to bankrupt vendors who fail to meet microscopic regulatory standards. I located the perfect candidate within 10 minutes. A defense logistics agency sought a primary distributor for specialized hydraulic actuators used in armored transport vehicles. The headline figure boasted a $10 million payout distributed over 3 phases. However, the contract required strict adherence to domestic metallurgical sourcing mandates. The vendor had to provide exhaustive documentation proving every ounce of steel originated from approved domestic foundries. Failure to provide this chain of custody resulted in immediate contract termination and sweeping financial penalties. Nathan operated his brokerage by cutting corners. His entire business model relied on sourcing cheap, substandard materials from overseas manufacturers and falsifying the import documentation to bypass federal oversight. He was a middleman who thrived on regulatory loopholes. He would look at the $10 million figure and convince himself he could outsmart the auditors. He just needed to find the contract. During our first year of marriage, before I recognized his profound incompetence, we utilized a shared cloud drive to organize his initial corporate filings. I abandoned the platform years ago, but my tracking software indicated he still routinely monitored the digital space, hoping to glean insights from my archived accounting templates. I crafted a digital breadcrumb. I downloaded a heavily redacted summary of the hydraulic actuator proposal. I highlighted the 8-figure payout and placed the file into a folder labeled Priority Acquisition Targets. I added a fake internal memo addressed to a fictional colleague, suggesting this bid was a guaranteed windfall for whichever firm secured the initial materials. I uploaded the packet to the forgotten cloud drive, leaving the bait glistening in the digital waters. I did not have to wait long. Less than 2 hours later, my security dashboard registered a ping. An external Internet Protocol address, originating from Nathan's office, had accessed the drive and downloaded the file. The trap was officially set. Nathan grew up in a middle-class household, constantly striving to project an image of unassailable wealth. He attended a prestigious private university on a partial athletic scholarship, spending 4 years surrounded by trust fund heirs. That environment cultivated a deep-seated inferiority complex. He desperately craved the validation of his peers, requiring visible status symbols to mask his internal insecurities. Audrey preyed upon that exact weakness, demanding endless luxury to validate her own social climbing ambitions. To secure the federal bid, Nathan required substantial upfront capital to purchase the initial round of hydraulic components. Traditional banks would take one look at his collapsing credit score and deny him instantly. He would turn to the shadow market, corporate loan sharks offering mezzanine debt at extortionate interest rates, using his failing logistics firm as collateral. He would sign any document placed in front of him, blinded by the promise of a $10 million government check. 2 days later, I witnessed the fruits of my labor. McLean is a wealthy Virginia suburb characterized by sprawling estates and high-end retail boutiques. The air carries the distinct scent of old money and manicured landscaping. I sat at a small iron table outside a European-style cafe, reviewing a stack of physical case files. I wore a tailored charcoal blazer blending seamlessly into the affluent lunchtime crowd. The aroma of roasted espresso beans mixed with a crisp autumn breeze. The unmistakable guttural roar of a high-performance engine interrupted the quiet hum of conversation on the patio. A gleaming midnight blue imported sports utility vehicle pulled up to the valet stand across the cobblestone street. The paint reflected the afternoon sun with blinding intensity. The heavy doors swung open. Nathan stepped out onto the pavement. He wore a crisp suit that looked suspiciously new, his posture radiating a manufactured triumph. He tossed the keys to the valet with an arrogant flick of his wrist. Audrey emerged from the passenger side, gripping a structured designer handbag. She tossed her blonde hair over her shoulder, her laughter carrying across the street. She clung to his arm, projecting an image of victorious prosperity. I lifted my glass of sparkling water. The carbonation bit pleasantly at the back of my throat as I studied their grand arrival. My trained eyes bypassed the polished exterior of the vehicle and focused on the license plate frame. It bore the insignia of a niche dealership notorious in financial circles for catering to subprime luxury buyers. They specialized in predatory lending, utilizing contracts that allowed them to repossess the asset the moment a single payment bounced. The vehicle did not belong to Nathan. It belonged to a corporate creditor. He had leveraged the toxic loan money intended for the government contract to buy his mistress a depreciating asset, prioritizing her vanity over his own survival. I offered a genuine frigid smile, savoring the crisp water. Audrey turned her head, her gaze sweeping across the cafe patio. She spotted me sitting alone. Her triumphant smile widened into a vindictive smirk. She nudged Nathan, pointing discreetly in my direction. They shared a conspiratorial whisper, clearly reveling in the belief that they had bested me. They thought I was a pathetic, discarded relic, forced to watch them ascend to the upper echelons of Virginia society. Letting your enemy believe they possess the high ground is a fundamental principle of strategic warfare. It breeds complacency. Audrey leaned into Nathan, her eyes locked on mine, issuing a silent challenge. She wanted a reaction. She wanted me to storm across the street and cause a public scene, validating her power over my emotions. I merely turned a page in my case file, refusing to grant her the satisfaction of my attention. My indifference was a calculated strike, denying her the dramatic confrontation she craved. Audrey huffed, turning away and marching into a luxury boutique with Nathan in tow. Her desperate need for public validation would not be satisfied by a silent exchange across a crowded street. The Commonwealth Gala was approaching this weekend. It was the premier event for defense contractors and political figures, a night where reputations were solidified or destroyed. Audrey would undoubtedly attend, draped in her least designer clothing, eager to humiliate me in front of the very elite circles she had usurped. I anticipated her hostility. I was relying on it. Her vanity would provide the perfect stage to turn her new, fragile empire into a weapon of her own destruction. The Virginia Commonwealth Gala is the undeniable apex of the regional social calendar. Hosted in a sprawling historic ballroom in Richmond, it serves as a glittering collision point for defense contractors, federal politicians, and old Southern money. It is an environment where multi-million-dollar deals are brokered over scotch, and reputations are quietly dismantled between courses. The ballroom itself was a masterpiece of architectural excess, featuring soaring vaulted ceilings, gilded mirrors, and massive crystal chandeliers that fractured the light into 1,000 prismatic shards. I arrived precisely 45 minutes after the official start time, ensuring my entrance bypassed the frantic initial crush of social climbers, desperately jockeying for position near the entryways. I did not require a grand announcement. I glided through the ornate mahogany doors, wearing a custom-tailored gown woven from a midnight blue silk crepe. The garment possessed zero visible branding, no flashy logos or ostentatious embellishments. It was a masterpiece of structural precision, designed by an independent artisan in Georgetown. The fabric draped flawlessly, projecting an aura of quiet, untouchable authority. I secured my hair in an elegant chignon and accessorized solely with a pair of brilliant-cut diamond stud earrings, inherited from my grandmother. True power does not scream for attention. It simply commands the space it occupies. The atmosphere in the room was a dense, intoxicating cocktail of expensive perfume, roasted beef tenderloin, and the sharp, metallic scent of ambition. I accepted a flute of vintage champagne from a passing waiter and navigated the crowded floor. I recognized several high-level executives whose corporate ledgers I had audited over the past half-decade. They offered respectful nods, parting slightly to allow me passage. They understood that the woman in the midnight blue gown possessed the federal clearance to dismantle their empires if she discovered a single fraudulent invoice. My social capital was not derived from my husband. It was forged in the fires of relentless competence. Nathan and Audrey arrived less than 20 minutes later. Their entrance was a desperate, noisy spectacle, entirely devoid of grace. They swept through the mahogany doors, demanding the attention of every guest within a 50-foot radius. Nathan wore a tuxedo that was impeccably cut, but possessed a distinct, unnatural sheen, suggesting the fabric was a high-end synthetic blend rather than pure wool. He practically strutted across the marble floor, projecting the manufactured swagger of a man who believed he had just conquered the federal procurement system. He was riding the euphoric high of the poisoned $10 million contract, utterly convinced that he was the smartest predator in the room. Audrey clung to his arm, executing her role as the triumphant new partner with maximum theatricality. She wore a heavily beaded emerald gown that plunged dramatically at the neckline. It was a loud, aggressive piece of fashion, designed to scream wealth to anyone who lacked the trained eye to recognize leased inventory. She swept her gaze across the ballroom, searching for an audience to validate her ascension. Her eyes inevitably locked onto mine. I was standing near a towering floral arrangement, conversing quietly with a retired Air Force general who consulted on cybersecurity protocols. Audrey stiffened her grip on Nathan's arm, tightening visibly. She leaned in, whispering frantically in his ear. I watched Nathan's jaw tense, his initial bravado cracking for a fraction of a second before he smoothed his expression back into a mask of arrogant superiority. Audrey could not resist the gravitational pull of her own vanity. She needed to prove to the entire room that she had not just taken my husband, but that she had broken me in the process. She detached herself from Nathan and began marching directly across the ballroom floor. Her leased stilettos clicked sharply against the marble, signaling her approach like a ticking clock. I excused myself from the general, turning to face her with a calm, unyielding expression. The ambient chatter in our immediate vicinity dropped a few decibels, as the surrounding guests sensed the impending collision. High society thrives on passive-aggressive skirmishes, but a direct public confrontation is a rare, highly entertaining spectacle. Audrey stopped 3 feet away, invading my personal space with calculated aggression. The scent of her cloying floral perfume washed over me, a stark reminder of the humid night she stood in my foyer. She offered a broad, saccharine smile that was entirely devoid of warmth. "Pamela, I honestly did not expect you to show your face tonight," Audrey announced, her voice pitched loudly enough to ensure the nearby tables caught every syllable. She tilted her head, her eyes tracing the clean, unbranded lines of my silk gown with manufactured pity. "It must be so incredibly difficult, attending these events all by yourself now. I told Nathan we should have sent you a courtesy invitation to sit at our table. It is just tragic seeing you wandering around with such a sad, lonely life." She was deploying the classic tactics of a middle school bully, utilizing public humiliation to establish dominance. She expected me to flush with embarrassment, to stammer a defensive reply, or perhaps even flee the ballroom in tears. She wanted to stand over the wreckage of my composure and declare herself the undisputed victor of our social war. I did not raise my voice. I did not shift my weight or break eye contact. I let the silence stretch an interrogation tactic I frequently employ to make nervous executives sweat. Audrey's smile began to strain at the edges as the silence grew heavy and suffocating. She shifted uncomfortably, realizing that her theatrical ambush was failing to trigger the desired reaction. I took a slow, measured sip of my champagne. The cold effervescence rolled over my tongue. I lowered the glass, leaning forward just enough to invade her meticulously constructed personal bubble. My voice dropped to a glacial whisper, pitched precisely so that only she could hear the execution. "Your performance is fascinating, Audrey," I murmured, my gaze sweeping downward to inspect her footwear. "Those are the current season platform heels from a very specific Italian designer. They retail for approximately $2,000. Yet, I happen to know that the corporate loan your new partner secured to fund this pathetic illusion carries an extortionate 24% annual percentage rate.
Audrey's eyes widened fractionally.
The smug superiority fractured, revealing a glimpse of the frantic social climber underneath. I did not stop. I stepped closer, pressing the advantage with surgical precision. You are parading around this ballroom in leased clothing, funded by predatory mezzanine debt, I continued, the words slicing through her arrogant armor. But the debt is the least of your concerns. Have you ever researched the federal sentencing guidelines for executing fraudulent real estate transfers across state lines? The Department of Justice does not view the laundering of stolen government funds as a minor indiscretion. They view it as a severe felony.
The color drained entirely from Audrey's face, leaving her skin a stark, sickly white beneath her heavy contouring makeup. Her jaw slacked her mouth, opening and closing soundlessly. She tried to formulate a denial to laugh off my words as the desperate ramblings of a bitter ex-wife, but the sheer specificity of my accusations paralyzed her. She realized in that exact moment that I was not a blind, discarded victim. I was the architect of her impending destruction. "Enjoy the champagne, Audrey,"
I whispered, stepping back and restoring the physical distance between us.
"It will be a long time before you taste vintage brut in a federal penitentiary."
I turned my back on her, walking away with slow, deliberate grace. I did not look over my shoulder. I did not need to. I knew exactly what was happening behind me. The psychological strike had landed perfectly. Audrey was standing frozen in the middle of the crowded ballroom, her carefully curated reality shattering into a million jagged pieces. For the remainder of the evening, I observed her from across the room. The transformation was spectacular. The loud, aggressive social climber had vanished entirely. She spent the rest of the gala clinging desperately to Nathan's arm, her eyes darting nervously around the room, jumping at every sudden movement. She flinched when the catering staff dropped a tray of glassware, her paranoia amplifying the ambient noise of the party into a deafening roar. She was suffocating under the weight of her own crimes, trapped in a glittering ballroom while the invisible walls of a federal cage closed in around her. Nathan remained completely oblivious to her internal panic, continuing to boast about his fabricated $10 million contract to anyone who would listen. He was happily driving their leased luxury vehicle straight toward a brick wall, completely unaware that I had already cut the brake lines. The gala concluded, the guests filtering out into the crisp Virginia night. I returned to my hotel room, energized by the encounter. The social skirmish was over. It was time to unleash the federal hammer. The morning light would bring a reckoning that would permanently erase their fraudulent empire from the map. The morning after the Commonwealth Gala arrived with a pale gray light bleeding through the heavy curtains of my hotel suite. The psychological strike against Audrey had landed perfectly, cracking the foundation of her arrogant facade. However, verbal skirmishes at high society events are ultimately just theater. Real power lies in the methodical execution of undeniable data. It was time to pull the federal tripwire and permanently neutralize the threat they posed. I ordered a pot of black coffee from room service, setting up my workstation on the glass dining table. My encrypted laptop hummed to life. Over the past 3 weeks, I had meticulously compiled a comprehensive forensic dossier detailing the entire architecture of Nathan's embezzlement syndicate. A standard auditor might simply highlight the discrepancies and flag them for a low-level review. I was not conducting a standard audit. I was building an impenetrable federal case designed to secure an immediate indictment. The defense contracting sector operates under strict oversight mechanisms. The Defense Criminal Investigative Service acts as the primary enforcement arm, actively hunting for fraudulent vendors who compromise military supply chains. They rely heavily on insider information, providing secure whistleblower portals for verified contractors to submit actionable intelligence. I opened the DCIS Secure Reporting Matrix. The interface was a stark, sterile web portal completely devoid of the glossy design elements favored by corporate platforms. It required specific clearance credentials just to initiate a submission. I typed my identification numbers authorizing my digital signature. The first section of the report demanded a summary of the alleged offenses. I kept my language clinical and objective, devoid of any emotional qualifiers. I explicitly named Nathan's logistics brokerage, citing multiple violations of the False Claims Act. I detailed the systemic overbilling protocol, explaining exactly how he procured substandard commercial components from unverified overseas suppliers and fraudulently invoiced the government for high-grade tactical materials. To ensure the federal investigators understood the sheer magnitude of the fraud, I did not rely on estimated figures. I attached the raw, unredacted spreadsheets I had extracted from his compromised internal network. I highlighted the exact profit margins he was illegally generating, mapping the stolen funds down to the exact penny. The second phase of the submission required evidence of a laundering mechanism. Federal prosecutors look for the secondary crime, the active attempt to conceal the stolen capital. This was where Audrey's contribution became the fatal linchpin of the operation. I uploaded a separate data packet focusing entirely on the ghost companies she had established using her real estate license. I linked the fraudulent vendor accounts directly to the physical address of her old Fairfax apartment. I provided the corresponding state tax identification numbers, proving the entities existed solely on paper, without any legitimate commercial footprint. I then uploaded the internal routing logs, demonstrating how Nathan systematically wired the stolen federal funds into those specific dummy accounts, attempting to wash the cash through fake consulting fees. The final, crucial piece of evidence involved the forged signatures. Nathan had carelessly digitized his authorization stamps, leaving a clear audit trail on every fraudulent invoice he submitted. I pulled high-resolution scans of the procurement documents, contrasting his authentic signature against the manipulated digital overlays he used to bypass secondary compliance checks. The forgery was undeniable. I reviewed the entire dossier one last time. It was a masterpiece of forensic analysis, a lethal weapon forged entirely from their own incompetence. I had handed the federal government a fully solved felony case on a silver platter, complete with the exact routing numbers, shell company addresses, and digital confessions required to secure a conviction. The submission portal required a final confirmation click. I hovered the cursor over the submit button, taking a slow, measured breath. Pressing that button was the point of no return. It would trigger a cascade of automated federal alerts, notifying the investigative field office and potentially freezing his active contracts. The machinery of the United States justice system moves slowly, but once it locks onto a target, its momentum is absolute and inescapable. I thought about the night Nathan stood in my foyer, demanding a dramatic emotional collapse. I thought about Audrey clutching the leather keychain, believing she had successfully stolen my life. They wanted me to play the role of the hysterical, discarded wife fighting a petty domestic skirmish. I refused the role. I was elevating the conflict to a battlefield they lacked the intellect to navigate. I clicked the mouse. A small digital chime emanated from the laptop speakers, signaling the successful transmission of the encrypted packet. The screen refreshed, displaying a stark confirmation number. The whistleblower report was officially lodged within the DCIS mainframe. I leaned back in the chair, lifting my coffee cup. The bitter, dark liquid tasted like absolute victory. The trap was fully set. The federal tripwire had been triggered, and Nathan was currently sprinting blindly toward it. He was entirely focused on the fake $10 million request for proposal I had left on the cloud drive.
He believed he was days away from securing a massive government payout, completely unaware that the very agency he was attempting to defraud was now actively investigating his historical ledgers. The sheer, beautiful irony of the situation provided a deep, resonant satisfaction. He was utilizing predatory loan capital to fund Audrey's extravagant lifestyle, banking on a poisoned contract to save him from bankruptcy. He was actively digging his own grave, while the federal investigators were quietly measuring him for the coffin. The next phase of the operation required absolute patience. I needed to let the federal machinery process the dossier, allowing the investigators to secure their arrest warrants. Meanwhile, Nathan and Audrey would continue to inflate their fraudulent reality, staging their final, desperate performance. They needed to feel invincible, right up until the exact moment the ground vanished beneath their feet. My phone vibrated on the glass table, interrupting the quiet triumph of the morning. An automated calendar alert flashed across the screen. The notification detailed an upcoming event that I had subtly orchestrated through a series of anonymous social media prompts targeting Audrey's relentless vanity. Audrey was planning to host a massive catered celebration at the Arlington Colonial home. She intended to showcase her supposed new wealth to my mother and the surrounding social circle, solidifying her position as the triumphant new lady of the estate. She was throwing a party to celebrate the fake $10 million contract burning through the last remaining thousands of their high-interest loan cash. It was the perfect stage for the inevitable collapse. They were inviting their entire social ecosystem to witness the exact moment the illusion shattered. I closed the laptop, the digital confirmation number safely archived in my secure server. The federal trap was set. The financial firewall was impenetrable, and the social execution was scheduled for the weekend. I walked over to the window, looking out over the Potomac River, ready to watch their House of Cards spectacular burn to the ground. The weekend arrived bearing the crisp chill of a Virginia autumn, providing the ideal backdrop for a high society gathering. The Arlington Colonial Estate glowed like a beacon of fabricated prosperity. Every window of the residence blazed with warm, golden light, casting long shadows across the manicured lawns. A parade of luxury vehicles lined the curving driveway, while uniformed valets hurried to open doors for the arriving elite. Audrey had spared no expense to celebrate her supposed ascension. She hired a classical string quartet to play on the wraparound porch, and arranged for towering floral centerpieces to dominate the foyer. From the quiet sanctuary of my new home, I observed the entire spectacle unfold in real time. Audrey possessed a relentless need for external validation, treating her social media channels as a live broadcast of her perceived triumph. She uploaded constant updates, documenting the imported caviar, the vintage champagne towers, and the wealthy guests filtering into the residence. Her vanity functioned as my personal surveillance network. I watched her preen for the camera, draped in a rented designer gown, wearing the synthetic pearl necklace with the cheap rose clasp. She smiled brightly, entirely oblivious to the subtle, mocking glances exchanged by the country club wives circulating through the dining room. The guests believed they were attending a celebration of a monumental defense contract. Nathan had spent the past 48 hours fueling the rumor mill, boasting that his logistics firm was on the verge of securing a $10 million procurement deal with the federal government. He utilized the fake request for proposal I planted on the cloud drive as irrefutable proof of his impending wealth. The promise of that phantom contract served as the fragile glue holding his entire illusion together. While auditing his compromised business ledgers earlier in the week, I uncovered a deeply buried financial anomaly that added a brilliant layer of dramatic irony to the evening. Nathan required immediate capital to secure the initial inventory for the fabricated defense bid. Traditional lenders had slammed their doors in his face due to his decaying credit score. I traced a sudden, substantial influx of cash deposited into his operating account just 5 days prior. The sum was a bridge loan totaling $500,000. When I decrypted the routing numbers identifying the source of that loan, a cold sense of satisfaction washed over me.
The funds originated from a private wealth management trust administered by my mother.
Patricia did not possess $500,000 in liquid capital. Her wealth was tied up in conservative retirement portfolios and the equity of her Great Falls estate. To generate that kind of cash, she had leveraged her pristine reputation within the country club. She quietly approached her wealthy friends, the wives of retired generals and corporate executives, pitching them an exclusive ground floor investment opportunity. She convinced them to pool their resources, offering them a guaranteed exponential return, funded by her golden son-in-law and his guaranteed government contract. Patricia chose to bankroll the man who abandoned me, actively financing my replacement. She wanted the ultimate bragging rights. She wanted to stand among her peers as the visionary matriarch who propelled a local logistics broker into the stratosphere of federal defense contracting. By syndicating that bridge loan, she inextricably linked her own social standing and the financial security of her closest friends to Nathan's fraudulent empire. When his business inevitably collapsed, she would not just lose her own money. She would face the wrath of the most powerful women in Virginia. Through the digital screen, I watched Patricia holding court near the grand fireplace. She wore a tailored ivory suit, gripping a crystal flute of champagne. She nodded gracefully, accepting the preemptive congratulations from the very women whose funds she had funneled into a failing enterprise. She looked entirely triumphant, secure in the belief that she had backed the winning horse. Beneath the glittering surface of the party, the structural integrity of their reality was already buckling. The high-interest loans Nathan secured to fund the catering and the luxury car lease were drying up. He stood near the mahogany bar, projecting the image of a corporate titan, but his body language betrayed a frantic underlying tension. He kept checking his phone, his thumb swiping aggressively across the screen. I knew he was receiving automated alerts from his bank, detailing insufficient funds and declined transactions. The caterer, a stern-looking man in a black suit, approached Nathan discreetly. The microphone on Audrey's live stream picked up the faint, tense exchange. The caterer informed Nathan that the secondary credit card provided for the final payment had failed to process. He politely requested an alternative method of compensation. Nathan flushed a mottled shade of red, his jaw clenching. He patted his pockets, forcing a tight, strained laugh, claiming it was a mere fraud prevention hold placed by his overly cautious bank. He promised to write a certified check on Monday morning, sweating profusely under the caterer's skeptical gaze. The balloon mortgage I tethered to his logistics firm had officially matured 48 hours prior. For a year, he enjoyed deceptively low monthly payments, ignoring the dense contractual language detailing the impending principal balance. The bank had sent multiple warning letters demanding the final lump sum. Nathan ignored them all, banking his entire survival on the $10 million federal contract he believed he was about to sign. The grand finale of the evening arrived not with a dramatic announcement, but with the quiet, unassuming crunch of tires on gravel. A generic gray sedan pulled onto the edge of the property, bypassing the bustling valet stand. A man, wearing a standard nondescript suit, stepped out of the vehicle, holding a thick manila envelope. He walked up the front steps, weaving through the elegantly dressed guests lingering on the porch. Audrey stood in the foyer filming another video update as the man stepped through the open mahogany doors. She lowered her phone, offering him a brilliant, practiced smile, assuming he was a late-arriving VIP guest. She stepped forward, preparing to offer him a glass of champagne. The man did not return the smile. He scanned the room, his eyes locking onto Nathan, who was currently extricating himself from the caterer. The man walked directly toward him, cutting a swift path across the imported Persian rug. The ambient chatter of the party began to drop as the guests sensed a disruption in the social atmosphere. Patricia turned her head, her polite smile faltering as she watched the stranger approach her son-in-law. Nathaniel O'Brien,
The man stated, his voice carrying a crisp, authoritative tone that sliced through the string music. Nathan froze his hand hovering over his empty glass. He blinked, attempting to maintain his wealthy facade. "Yes, that is me. Can I help you?" The man extended his arm, slapping the thick manila envelope firmly against Nathan's chest. Nathan instinctively brought his hands up to catch the heavy packet. "You have been served," the man announced, turning on his heel and walking straight out the front door without another word. A heavy, suffocating silence fell over the foyer. The string quartet in the corner faltered, a single violinist hitting a discordant note before ceasing entirely. Dozens of eyes stared at the envelope clutched in Nathan's trembling hands. Audrey rushed to his side, her voice high and breathless, demanding to know what the document was. She reached out, tearing the envelope open before he could stop her. She pulled out a thick stack of legal papers, the bold red print of the local financial institution stamped across the header. It was a formal notice of foreclosure. The grace period had expired. The bank was officially initiating the seizure of the colonial estate due to non-payment of the matured balloon mortgage. Audrey stared at the document, the color draining from her face. Her leased designer dress suddenly looked hollow. She looked around the grand foyer, the crystal chandelier, and the sweeping staircase, realizing that none of it actually belonged to her. The manifested luxury lifestyle she had been bragging about all evening was a temporary illusion, and the owners had just arrived to reclaim the property. Patricia stepped forward, her ivory suit seeming to lose its crispness. She snatched the top page from Audrey's trembling fingers. Her eyes darted across the legal jargon, processing the numbers. She saw the staggering principal balance and the immediate demand to vacate the premises. The women she had convinced to invest in Nathan's company murmured among themselves, stepping away from the chaotic scene, creating a physical barrier of judgment. Patricia looked at Nathan, her eyes wide with a dawning, visceral horror. She realized she had bet her entire reputation and the wealth of her peers on a man who could not even afford the roof over his head. Nathan scrambled, his breathing shallow and rapid. He threw his hands up, attempting to patch the gaping hole in his reality. He raised his voice, offering a frantic, desperate lie. He claimed the foreclosure notice was a ridiculous clerical error generated by an automated banking system. He swore to Patricia and the surrounding guests that his company possessed abundant liquidity. He pointed toward the doors, his voice cracking under the pressure. He declared that he was scheduled to finalize a $10 million procurement contract with the Department of Defense first thing Monday morning. He promised that once the federal signatures were executed, he would buy the house outright and issue massive dividends to all his investors. He was setting his own trap, ensuring he would walk blindly into the execution chamber. He desperately needed that federal contract to be real to save him from social ruin and financial collapse. He would sprint toward the procurement boardroom on Monday, ready to sign any document placed in front of him, entirely unaware that I would be sitting at the head of the table, waiting to drop the final hammer. The Monday morning sun pierced the thick glass of the Federal Building, casting long, sharp, geometric shadows across the polished concrete floors. The Department of Defense Procurement Office, located in a secure facility in Alexandria, was a monument to bureaucratic efficiency. The corridors were silent, the air sterile and heavily filtered. Nathan navigated the complex security checkpoints with frantic, uncoordinated movements. His tailored suit, the same one he had worn to the disastrous Arlington party, was now visibly rumpled, his tie slightly askew. The panic radiating from him was palpable. The foreclosure notice had shattered his illusion of control, and he was sprinting blindly toward what he believed was his salvation. He thought he was walking into a routine vendor onboarding meeting. He thought he was about to sign a $10 million government contract that would instantly vaporize his debt and restore his fabricated empire. I was waiting for him. The primary boardroom was a massive, windowless chamber, dominated by an expansive mahogany table. The room smelled of ozone and expensive furniture polish. I sat at the head of the table, my posture perfectly straight, my hands resting lightly on a thick, gray dossier. I wore a structured charcoal suit, projecting the exact same clinical authority I utilized during high-stakes federal audits. I was not attending this meeting as a discarded wife. I was present as the lead forensic consultant for the Defense Criminal Investigative Service, having been officially deputized for this specific operation due to the irrefutable evidence I had provided. Flanking me were two senior contracting officers. They were seasoned career bureaucrats men who had spent decades reviewing logistics bids and identifying procurement fraud. They sat in stony silence, their expressions unreadable, masks of institutional protocol. They were present to witness the execution. The heavy oak doors swung open. Nathan stormed into the room, clutching a leather portfolio tightly against his chest. He was breathing heavily, his face flushed a mottled shade of red. He strode confidently toward the center of the table, expecting to greet a team of faceless government buyers eager to finalize his lucrative deal. He stopped dead in his tracks. The momentum completely vanished from his body. His eyes locked onto me sitting at the head of the table. The confusion hit him first, a momentary cognitive misfire as his brain struggled to process my presence in this secure federal space. He blinked rapidly, shaking his head slightly. "Pamela, what are you doing here?" he demanded, his voice cracking under the sudden, unexpected pressure. He glanced nervously at the two silent officers beside me. "This is a restricted procurement meeting. I am scheduled to sign the hydraulic actuator contract." I did not offer him a polite greeting. I did not shift my gaze. I looked at him with the detached curiosity of a scientist observing a specimen under a microscope. I let the silence stretch an interrogation technique I had perfected over a decade of auditing evasive executives. Nathan shifted his weight to his polished leather shoes squeaking softly against the carpet. The ambient hum of the ventilation system seemed to amplify in the quiet room. "There is no contract, Nathan," I stated, my voice flat and precise, cutting through the sterile air. "The request for proposal you downloaded from the cloud drive was a honeypot. It was a decoy file placed there specifically to monitor your digital behavior." He stared at me, his jaw dropping slightly. The words washed over him, but the meaning had not yet penetrated his thick layer of arrogance. "A decoy? What are you talking about? I received the official confirmation email on Friday. The bid was accepted." "The bid was flagged by the automated compliance matrix," I corrected, keeping my tone entirely conversational. "The hydraulic actuator contract contained specific metallurgical sourcing mandates. You submitted a supply chain model relying on unverified overseas foundries. You falsified the domestic origin certificates, utilizing the exact same methodology you employed to defraud the government on your previous transport component contracts." The color drained from Nathan's face, leaving his skin a sickly ashen gray. The mention of his past contracts, the exact mechanism of his systemic fraud, paralyzed him. He took a slow, stumbling step backward, his hand dropping from his chest, the leather portfolio slipping slightly from his grasp. "You do not know what you are talking about," he stammered, his voice thin and reedy. He looked desperately at the two officers beside me. "This is a domestic dispute. My ex-wife is experiencing a severe emotional breakdown. She is attempting to sabotage my business. I demand to speak with the lead procurement director immediately." The officers did not move. They did not blink. They simply stared at him, observing the erratic behavior of a cornered predator. I leaned forward, resting my elbows on the mahogany table. "I am the lead forensic consultant for this specific investigation, Nathan. The Defense Criminal Investigative Service reviewed the comprehensive dossier I submitted yesterday. They verified every single fraudulent invoice, every ghost company you established with Audrey, and every illicit wire transfer you executed over the last 2 years. Nathan's chest heaved, his breathing turning rapid and shallow. The illusion was fracturing, shattering into a million jagged pieces. He realized he was not standing in a boardroom negotiating a lucrative deal. He was standing in an interrogation chamber, facing the architect of his total annihilation. "You set me up," he whispered the accusation, lacking any real venom, replaced entirely by primal terror. "You planted the contract. You drove me to take out those loans. I simply provided you with an opportunity to demonstrate your incompetence," I replied, opening the thick gray dossier. "You chose to take on predatory mezzanine debt to fund a luxury lifestyle you could not afford. You chose to purchase a leased vehicle and host a lavish catered party while your balloon mortgage reached maturity. I did not force you to make those decisions, Nathan. Your vanity did." I pulled a single printed sheet of paper from the dossier. I slid it smoothly across the expansive mahogany table. The paper glided perfectly, coming to a halt directly in front of him. Nathan looked down at the document. It was a high-resolution printout of our former joint checking account statement. The balance was highlighted in stark, bold ink. Exactly $4.12. "You are completely bankrupt, Nathan," I stated, delivering the final, fatal blow with surgical precision. "The Arlington house is currently in active foreclosure. The high-interest loans you secured to chase this fake contract have defaulted. Your logistics firm is insolvent, and the federal authorities have frozen your operating accounts. You possess absolutely zero liquid capital." He stared at the bank statement, his hands trembling violently. The sheer magnitude of the devastation crushed the last remaining fragments of his arrogance. He was a man who defined his entire existence by his perceived wealth and his ability to project power. I had systematically stripped him of both, leaving him entirely defenseless. He looked up at me, tears welling in his eyes. The smooth, charismatic facade had completely dissolved, revealing a pathetic, terrified coward. He tried to speak, attempting to formulate an apology or a desperate plea for mercy, but his throat clicked dryly. He was hyperventilating, the oxygen failing to reach his lungs. "Pamela, please," he choked out the words, stumbling over each other. "We can fix this. I can explain the invoices. We can work out a settlement. I will give you whatever you want." I closed the dossier, the heavy cardboard cover snapping shut with a definitive thud. I did not feel pity or anger. I felt the profound, clean satisfaction of a perfectly executed audit. The ledger was finally balanced. "I already have everything I want, Nathan," I replied, standing up from the table. "My personal wealth is secured within an irrevocable trust. My professional reputation is pristine, and you are no longer my liability." I turned my back on him, walking toward the side door of the boardroom. The defensive phase of my strategy was complete. The financial execution had been delivered flawlessly. Now it was time to let the federal machinery finish the job. The quiet hum of the ventilation system was abruptly interrupted by the heavy, authoritative sound of tactical boots marching down the exterior corridor. The final consequence was arriving, and it carried handcuffs. The heavy oak doors of the procurement office did not simply open, they were forcefully breached. The deafening sound of solid wood hitting the interior wall reverberated through the sterile space. 4 federal agents strode into the room, moving in a highly coordinated tactical formation. They wore dark vests adorned with crisp yellow block letters, spelling out the identity of the Defense Criminal Investigative Service. Their rubber soles squeaked sharply against the polished concrete floor, shattering the quiet, bureaucratic atmosphere. Nathan stood paralyzed beside the mahogany table, his knuckles turning white as he gripped the edge of the wood. The 2 contracting officers flanking me remained seated, their expressions entirely impassive, indicating they had been briefed on this exact sequence of events. Special Agent Harrison, a tall, imposing man with a closely cropped haircut, stepped forward. He did not offer a polite greeting or a request for a conversation. He raised a leather badge wallet, presenting his credentials with practiced authority. He locked his gaze onto my former husband, speaking with a booming baritone voice that commanded the entire chamber. He declared Nathaniel under arrest for multiple felony violations of the False Claims Act, systematic procurement fraud, and conspiracy to launder stolen government funds. The charges hung in the air, a heavy, undeniable verdict condemning the logistics broker to decades in a federal penitentiary. Nathan attempted a pathetic, frantic defense. He raised his hands, palms facing outward, babbling a stream of incoherent denials. He pointed a trembling finger in my direction, claiming I was a disgruntled spouse, orchestrating a complex misunderstanding. Agent Harrison did not even glance my way. He closed his badge wallet, stepping smoothly into the personal space of the disgraced executive, and gripped the lapel of the wrinkled designer suit. With a swift, practiced motion, the agent spun Nathan around, pressing him firmly against the polished mahogany surface. The sharp metallic click of steel handcuffs snapping shut around his wrists sounded like a final judge striking a gavel. I remained seated, observing the execution of justice with clinical detachment. The smooth, charismatic broker who had mocked me in my own foyer was now weeping openly. His knees buckled, forcing the federal agents to haul him upright. They began reciting his legal rights, the monotone phrasing serving as the official eulogy for his fabricated empire. As they marched him toward the exit, his eyes met mine one last time. There was no arrogance left in his expression, only a vast, hollow terror. He finally understood the cost of underestimating a forensic auditor. The doors swung shut behind them, leaving the room cloaked in a pristine, satisfying silence. While the federal trap snapped shut in Alexandria, a simultaneous operation was unfolding miles away at the Arlington Colonial Estate. Audrey was currently standing in the grand foyer, attempting to salvage the wreckage of her catered celebration. The process server delivering the foreclosure notice had already fractured the illusion, but she desperately tried to maintain her social climbing facade. She clutched a crystal flute of champagne, forcing a bright, brittle smile for the benefit of the country club wives lingering near the entrance. Patricia stood a few feet away, her ivory suit looking suddenly disheveled, her posture rigid with dawning panic. My mother was frantically trying to calculate the financial exposure she faced, having syndicated a bridge loan to a man who was officially bankrupt. The scent of expensive roasted appetizers mingled with the crisp autumn breeze filtering through the open patio doors. The hired string quartet played a tense, discordant melody, struggling to cover the awkward whispers of the wealthy guests. Audrey adjusted the neckline of her rented emerald gown, her fingers nervously grazing the fake pearl necklace resting against her collarbone. She needed Nathan to walk through the front doors, holding the signed $10 million contract to validate her existence and silence the judging whispers of the elite women surrounding her. Instead, the quiet suburban street outside erupted into chaos. A low, pulsing siren wailed, piercing the elegant atmosphere of the party. Brilliant, strobing flashes of red and blue light sliced through the tall colonial windows, painting the manicured lawns and the crystal chandelier in harsh, alternating hues. The heavy crunch of tires tearing across the pristine gravel driveway signaled the arrival of a joint tactical task force. The guests froze their champagne flutes, hovering in midair, as the unmistakable sound of multiple car doors slamming shut echoed across the property. The mahogany front doors were thrown wide open, letting a gust of cold air sweep away the warmth of the foyer. A squad of armed federal agents flooded the entryway, their presence instantly neutralizing the polite country club gathering. The lead officer, a stern woman holding a clipboard, scanned the terrified crowd. The elite wives of defense contractors and retired generals instinctively backed away, creating a wide physical perimeter around Audrey. Patricia dropped her crystal glass, letting it shatter on the imported Persian rug, her hands flying to her mouth in unadulterated horror. She was watching her prized social standing evaporate under the flashing lights of law enforcement vehicles. The lead agent identified her target immediately. She marched directly toward Audrey, cutting a swift path through the parting guests. She announced the federal warrants, her voice projecting clearly over the terrified gasps of the attendees. She informed the real estate agent that she was being formally charged with felony wire fraud, conspiracy to commit federal money laundering, and the creation of fraudulent commercial entities. The agent detailed the exact addresses of the ghost companies Audrey had established using her real estate license, publicly exposing her role as the primary accomplice in the embezzlement syndicate. Audrey recoiled, her eyes wide with shock. The manufactured luxury lifestyle she had boasted about online was crumbling in front of the very audience she had so desperately tried to impress. She shook her head frantically, her voice rising to a high-pitched shriek. She denied everything, claiming she was just an innocent girlfriend who knew nothing about corporate ledgers or government contracts. She backed into a marble pillar, attempting to retreat from the closing net. The federal agent did not entertain the theatrical performance. She stepped forward, grabbing Audrey by the arm and twisting her forcefully toward the pillar. Audrey thrashed wildly, letting out a raw, desperate cry, fighting against the inevitable restraint. The agent moved with efficient, unyielding strength, pulling the wrists of the struggling woman sharply behind her back. As the heavy steel cuffs were brought upward, Audrey twisted her torso in a final, futile attempt to break free. The sudden, forceful movement caught the delicate chain resting against her neck. The cheap, base metal rose clasp of her beloved necklace snagged on the thick fabric of the tactical vest worn by the arresting officer. The brittle, synthetic latch, designed for bulk, wholesale distribution, could not withstand the tension. It snapped with a sharp, distinctive crack. The strand broke wide open. Dozens of pristine replica pearls spilled into the air, cascading downward like a sudden hailstorm. They hit the polished hardwood floor of the foyer, bouncing and scattering in every direction. The hard plastic beads rattled loudly, rolling under the designer shoes of the horrified country club guests, and coming to rest near the trembling feet of my mother. The sound was a harsh staccato rhythm, an auditory manifestation of her fraudulent life breaking entirely apart. Audrey slumped against the marble column, the handcuffs clicking securely into place. She stared down at the scattered fake pearls, her chest heaving with defeated sobs. The ultimate symbol of her stolen victory, her proof of endless devotion, was exposed as a cheap, worthless imitation. The elite guests whispered furiously among themselves, pulling their expensive coats tightly around their shoulders as they rushed toward the exits, eager to distance themselves from the radioactive scandal. Patricia sank onto a nearby velvet bench, burying her face in her hands, mourning the loss of her reputation and the financial ruin of her closest friends. The tactical team began escorting a weeping Audrey down the front steps toward the waiting transport vehicles, the flashing lights illuminating her tear-streaked makeup. The empire built on stolen federal funds and toxic vanity had been thoroughly dismantled, leaving behind nothing but the scattered remnants of a broken imitation. The operation was nearing its close, setting the stage for my final, quiet departure from their ruined lives. The aftermath of a federal strike is a chaotic symphony of flashing lights, blaring sirens, and shattered egos. However, my departure from the Arlington Colonial Estate was entirely soundless. I navigated my car through the winding, damp streets of the Virginia suburbs, leaving the wreckage of my former life firmly in the rearview mirror. The rain had finally ceased, replaced by a biting, clear autumn wind that swept away the cloying humidity.
For the first time in 6 years, I drove without the heavy, invisible burden of a partner's incompetence dragging against my momentum. The following morning, the cleanup commenced. The legal and financial execution I had initiated was swift, absolute, and utterly merciless. Nathan's logistics firm was formally seized by the federal government at dawn. The Defense Criminal Investigative Service placed padlocks on the warehouse doors, freezing all corporate assets and confiscating the server drives I had already mapped. The phantom $10 million contract he believed would save him was officially flagged as a honey trap, entering the federal ledger as the definitive evidence of his criminal intent. His high-interest corporate loans defaulted, instantly triggering a wave of predatory collections that swallowed whatever meager liquidity his business possessed. He was transferred to a maximum security holding facility in Alexandria, his bail permanently revoked due to his use of fraudulent collateral. He faced a staggering array of federal charges, effectively guaranteeing he would spend the remainder of his prime earning years in a concrete cell. Audrey's implosion was equally spectacular. Her arraignment made the front page of the local Virginia business journals. The federal prosecutors did not buy her performance as the naive, manipulated girlfriend. The paper trail connecting her real estate license to the ghost companies was undeniable. Confronted with the reality of a decade in prison, her fragile alliance with Nathan disintegrated entirely. She attempted to secure a plea deal by offering to testify against him, but the prosecutors declined. I had already provided them with the definitive forensic roadmap. Her testimony was redundant and unnecessary. Her real estate license was permanently revoked, her leased luxury vehicle was repossessed from the impound lot, and she was remanded to federal custody. Her desperate climb up the social ladder ending in a humiliating freefall. The collateral damage extended beyond the criminal syndicate, striking the very heart of the toxic social ecosystem that had nurtured it. Patricia's downfall was the most profound and public execution of the entire operation. When the news of Nathan's arrest broke, the elite women of Great Falls did not offer sympathy. They demanded their money. Patricia had syndicated a $500,000 bridge loan using the investments of her closest friends, staking her impeccable country club reputation on Nathan's fabricated success. The realization that she had funneled their wealth into an empty void triggered a relentless, vicious backlash. The women she had spent decades cultivating turned on her with the ruthless efficiency of a corporate board ousting a failing chief executive. Patricia was formally requested to resign from the charity committees. Her invitations to the spring galas were quietly rescinded. The social ostracization was absolute. The women of Virginia high society forgive many things, but they do not forgive a bad investment. The financial ruin was immediate. The bank, holding the predatory balloon mortgage on her estate, initiated aggressive foreclosure proceedings. Stripped of her retirement portfolio and lacking the liquid capital to service the extortionate interest rates, Patricia was powerless. Within 60 days, the massive neoclassical mansion was seized. She was forced to auction her antique furniture and designer wardrobe to cover her mounting legal fees, retreating to a modest rented condominium in a neighboring county. The woman who had prioritized the illusion of wealth over the loyalty of her own daughter was left with nothing but the bitter reality of her own poor judgment. I did not reach out to her. I did not offer financial assistance or a shoulder to cry on. I maintained the boundaries I had established the day she handed Audrey the family recipe book. She had made her choice, aligning herself with a fraudulent predator to protect her social standing. I simply allowed the natural consequences of that choice to unfold without interference. 30 days after the arrests, I received a notification from my real estate attorney. The Arlington Colonial home, the toxic asset I had strapped to Nathan's failing credit, was officially repossessed by the holding bank. The property was scheduled to be cleared and prepared for a public auction. I decided to visit the house one last time. I arrived on a crisp Tuesday afternoon. The sky was a brilliant, unyielding blue, casting sharp shadows across the manicured lawn.
A commercial moving truck was parked in the driveway, hired by the bank to remove the remnants of Nathan and Audrey's brief, disastrous occupancy. I stood on the sidewalk, my hands resting in the pockets of my tailored wool coat. I watched the movers carry out the expensive furniture Nathan had purchased on credit. They hauled out the plush velvet sofas, the imported dining table, and the massive crystal chandelier that Audrey had proudly showcased on her social media channels. Everything they had claimed as their own was being systematically boxed up and hauled away, destined for a liquidation sale. The colonial home, once a symbol of my marital stability, looked hollow and insignificant. The grand white pillars and the wraparound porch no longer represented a toxic, outdated facade. They simply represented a completed transaction. A young bank representative holding a clipboard noticed me standing on the sidewalk. He approached hesitantly, recognizing me from the property records. He offered a polite, sympathetic nod, assuming I was mourning the loss of my marital home. "I am sorry, ma'am," he said, gesturing toward the moving truck. "It must be difficult watching them clear it out." I looked at the house, then back at the young man. I did not offer a tight, sad smile. I offered him the genuine, unbothered expression of a woman whose ledger was perfectly balanced. "It is not difficult at all," I replied, my voice crisp and authoritative. "The property was a severe liability. I am simply observing the final stages of the liquidation." I turned away from the colonial estate, walking back toward my car. The chapter was officially closed. I slid behind the steering wheel, the engine purring to life. I did not look in the rearview mirror as I drove away. The subsequent months were a period of rapid, unhindered growth. Free from the financial drain of Nathan's incompetence, my personal wealth expanded exponentially within the secure confines of the irrevocable trust David had established. The Defense Criminal Investigative Service, impressed by the meticulous forensic dossier I had submitted, offered my consulting firm an exclusive, highly lucrative contract to develop new automated fraud detection algorithms for federal procurement portals. My professional reputation was not just pristine, it was elevated to the highest echelons of the defense industry. I purchased a new estate, a sleek, modern architectural masterpiece nestled high in the Blue Ridge Mountains, far away from the superficial noise of the Arlington suburbs. The property was entirely in my name, secured by my own capital, and completely insulated from external claims. I stood on the expansive cedar deck of my new home, the crisp mountain air biting pleasantly at my cheeks. The sun was beginning its descent, painting the rugged peaks in vibrant shades of gold and crimson. The silence surrounding the estate was absolute, a profound, pristine quiet that comes only when you have successfully excised every toxic element from your life. I held a ceramic mug of dark roast coffee, the heat warming my palms. The steam curled upward, dissolving into the cool evening breeze. I took a slow, satisfying sip, the bitter flavor grounding me in the present moment. The journey from the Arlington foyer to this mountain retreat was not fueled by dramatic emotional outbursts or vindictive screaming confrontations. It was fueled by cold, calculated competence. The most profound lesson extracted from the betrayal was that true power does not reside in the ability to forgive or the desire to destroy. True power resides in the ability to protect your own assets, outsmart your adversaries, and rebuild your empire on a foundation of absolute, unshakable self-reliance. I looked out over the sprawling valley, the vast expanse of Virginia stretching before me. I had taken the worst betrayal imaginable and transmuted it into an impenetrable fortress. I was mathematically untouchable, professionally thriving, and entirely free. I lowered the coffee mug, a genuine sharp smile touching my lips. The audit was officially complete, and the final balance was perfect. The wreckage of a life isn't usually the result of a sudden explosion. It's the slow, quiet erosion of honesty, the gradual substitution of convenience for truth. Looking back at the rubble of what was once my marriage, what strikes me isn't the betrayal itself, the affairs, the stolen funds, the desperate clawing for status. What strikes me is the legacy of deceit, the inheritance we were unknowingly preparing to hand down. In the aftermath of the federal raids and the foreclosed colonial estates, the most profound realization wasn't about surviving a sociopathic partner. It was about the terrifying responsibility of modeling reality for the next generation. In American culture, we are often sold a narrative that equates success with virtue. We are taught that the sprawling house, the imported cars, and the country club memberships are the tangible rewards of hard work and good character. This was the gospel according to my mother Patricia, and the guiding star for my ex-husband Nathan. They believed the facade was the foundation. But parenting, and by extension, the creation of a family, requires a structural integrity that cannot be bought or leased. It demands an unflinching commitment to reality, even when that reality is uncomfortable or unglamorous. The narrative of my divorce is a stark illustration of what happens when that integrity is absent. Nathan built an empire on federal wire fraud and ghost companies desperate to maintain an illusion of wealth. Audrey, coveting a lifestyle she hadn't earned, became his willing accomplice trading authenticity for leased designer gowns and fake pearl necklaces. They were adults playing a high-stakes game of make-believe, entirely consumed by their own vanity. But what if there had been children involved? What lessons would they have absorbed from a father who stole from his own clients and a mother figure who valued status over loyalty? Children are the ultimate auditors. They do not read balance sheets, but they read behavior with terrifying precision. They watch the micro-interactions, the subtle lies we tell to save face, the compromises we make for comfort. If a child had been raised in the toxic ecosystem Nathan and Audrey were trying to construct, they would have learned that truth is malleable, that loyalty is transactional, and that appearing successful is infinitely more important than actually being successful. Parenting, at its core, is the act of establishing a baseline of reality. It is the arduous, often unrewarding work of teaching a child that actions have consequences. This is where the concepts of fairness and emotional awareness become paramount. Fairness isn't about ensuring everyone gets an equal piece of the pie. It's about ensuring the rules of engagement are transparent and consistent. Emotional awareness isn't about shielding a child from pain. It's about giving them the tools to process that pain without resorting to deceit or manipulation. My mother failed this fundamental test. When forced to choose between the fabricated charm of a criminal son-in-law and the quiet competence of her own daughter, she chose the illusion. She handed the family recipe book, a symbol of inclusion and legacy, to a woman who had actively participated in my destruction. Patricia's parenting was contingent on my adherence to her superficial values. When I chose the rigid truth of an auditor's ledger over the comfortable lie of a country club gala, I became an outcast. This failure of maternal loyalty is perhaps the most devastating aspect of the entire ordeal. It underscores the danger of conditional love, a love predicated on performance rather than authenticity. A child raised under those conditions learns to perform, to curate an image, to build their own colonial estate of lies. They learn to prioritize the applause of strangers over the quiet satisfaction of a balanced ledger. The American ideal of the traditional family structure is often presented as a safeguard against this kind of moral decay. We assume that the presence of two parents, a house in the suburbs, and a steady income are sufficient to cultivate strong character. But structure without substance is merely scaffolding. A family built on deceit, even if it looks perfect from the street, is a liability waiting to collapse. My response to the betrayal wasn't a hysterical breakdown or a vindictive screaming match. It was a clinical, calculated withdrawal. I built an irrevocable trust, isolated my assets, and provided the federal authorities with a meticulously documented dossier of Nathan's crimes. I became mathematically untouchable. But this response wasn't just about self-preservation. It was a philosophical statement. It was a rejection of the chaotic, emotion-driven drama that Nathan and Audrey expected. It was a declaration that my reality, the reality of hard data, verifiable facts, and unyielding boundaries, was the only one that mattered. If I were to distill this experience into a lesson for the future, it would be this. Teach your children to be auditors of their own lives. Teach them to look past the least luxury vehicles and the superficial charm. Teach them to recognize the cheap clasp on a fake pearl necklace. Equip them with the emotional intelligence to understand that true power doesn't come from the ability to manipulate others, but from the ability to manage oneself. We must instill in the next generation a profound respect for consequences. When Nathan found himself handcuffed to a mahogany boardroom table, his arrogance evaporating into hyperventilating terror, he was finally facing the consequences he had spent years trying to outrun. When Audrey watched the fake pearls scatter across the hardwood floor of the foreclosed mansion, her fraudulent life breaking entirely apart, she was meeting the reality she had so desperately tried to ignore. These moments of reckoning are inevitable. The question isn't whether they will occur, but whether our children will have the integrity to face them or the cowardice to flee. The narrative of "he left me for my best friend" is more than a tale of corporate espionage and domestic revenge. It is a cautionary tale about the architecture of deceit. If you appreciate stories that dissect the complex mechanisms of betrayal and the cold, satisfying delivery of justice, please subscribe to Samantha Told Stories. Join us as we explore the hidden ledgers of human behavior. We are told that forgiveness is the ultimate virtue, the necessary conclusion to any story of betrayal. We are conditioned to believe that holding on to cold, hard facts is a sign of bitterness, a failure to move on. But perhaps true healing isn't found in absolution. Perhaps it is found in the absolute, pristine silence of a ledger perfectly balanced. The most profound act of self-care isn't letting go. It's recognizing that some debts are so toxic, the only responsible action is to let the bank seize the asset and watch it burn.